The letter arrived sealed in black wax, and the dead woman's hand had written only one name on it, Markby. In a chandler's attic in Marylebone, Wilmot Beaumont stitched bonnets for 3 pence apiece, her copper hair pinned beneath a widow's bonnet that had never been hers to wear. At her feet, a small boy of 3 played with a torn cloth lamb. His name was Edmund. He had a single dimple in his right cheek and gray steel eyes that did not belong to a seamstress's son. 4 years earlier, in a paneled study at Markby House, the young Duke Godfrey Wandesford had signed a separation without lifting his eyes from the page. He had not known about the child. He had not asked. She had walked out into a London rain in a gray wool dress, and the world had agreed to forget her. Then, beneath the elms of Hyde Park, a lacquered carriage drew sharply to a halt. Lady Honoria Quendon, her godmother, went white at the sight of the boy's dimple. The Duke of Markby, she said, was to place an emerald ring upon the finger of Lady Cassandra Wentworth that Friday at 5. The sealed letter still burned in Wilmot's pocket. It was Wednesday. She had until Friday to deliver it by hand. What the Duke read by candlelight at 2 in the morning was not a farewell. It was the beginning of a reckoning 3.5 years overdue. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. London, the autumn of 1818. Rain struck the tall windows of Markby House in slanting sheets, and the candles in the silver branches guttered without conviction. The study smelled of beeswax, old leather, and the cold iron of a fire that had been allowed to die 2 hours before. No one had thought to call for coal. No one in that room would have noticed if they had. At the long mahogany desk sat Godfrey Wandesford, 4th Duke of Markby, 28 years of age, 3 months returned from the corpse fields of Waterloo, and freshly schooled by his late father's solicitors in the precise weight a signature could carry. He held a goose quill above a sheet of foolscap, bearing his own seal at the head. He had not yet looked at his wife. She stood by the marble chimney-piece. 18 years old, in a traveling gown of slate blue merino, her copper hair drawn back so severely it pulled at the corners of her eyes. Her gloved hands were folded one over the other at the line of her waist. 6 weeks before, she had begun to suspect what she carried within her. She had not told him. She had not told anyone. The midwife in Berkeley Square had confirmed it on the Tuesday, and on the Tuesday evening, her husband's mother had set the page now before him on his blotter. Mr. Ambrose Fenwick, then 39, stood at the Duke's right elbow with a second sheet folded against his breast. His face wore the careful blankness of a man who had been instructed not to speak unless spoken to. "You will read it aloud, Fenwick," said the Dowager Duchess from the wing chair beside the cold grate. She did not raise her voice. She had no need to. His Grace ought to know what he signs. Fenwick's eyes flicked once toward the young woman by the chimney-piece, then away. He read. He read in the smooth, neutral cadence of a man who had drafted the document himself, and his hands did not tremble, though afterwards, in the carriage home, he was to be sick into his hat. The deed of separation was perpetual. The lady would relinquish the style and dignities of Duchess of Markby, would absent herself from the kingdom for a period not less than 7 years, would receive an annuity of £180 payable quarterly to a banker of her choosing, and would forfeit all claim, by herself or by any issue of the marriage living, or yet to be born, upon the persons, properties, and titles of the Wandesford line. The cause was stated in 3 Latin words and 1 English phrase, incompatibility of temper. When Fenwick had done, the Duke dipped his quill. He pressed it once against the rim of the well. He wrote his name beneath the words in the long, thin hand he had inherited from his grandfather, and he wrote it without pause and without flourish. The pen scratched, the fire did not crackle. From the street, a watchman called the half-hour. Wilmot Beaumont, who that night had still been the Duchess of Markby, and had carried within her a son she did not yet know was a son, watched the ink darken upon the page. She did not lift her eyes from it. She said, once, quietly, "Godfrey." He sanded the signature. He tapped the sand off. He folded the sheet along the prepared crease, sealed it with a wafer the color of dried blood, and handed it to Fenwick without looking up. "That will do, Mr. Fenwick," said the Dowager. The solicitor bowed. He moved to the chimney-piece as he had been instructed to do, presented the second sheet for the lady's signature, and laid out a traveling inkwell upon the marble beside her elbow. She lifted the quill. She set its nib upon the paper. She held it there for the length of one breath, and then for a second. The Duke at the desk did not turn his head. The pen did not descend. She set it back into the stand. She drew off her gloves, finger by finger, laid them folded upon the marble, and walked from the room without turning. The door closed behind her with the small sigh of a well-hung door, and the candles in the silver branches bent toward the draught and recovered. The dowager said, "She will sign in the morning." Mr. Fenwick gathered up the unsigned sheet. He restored it to his portfolio. He bowed again to his Grace, who had still not raised his eyes from the blotter, and he carried the second deed out into the rain. He locked it that night in the inner drawer of his safe in Lincoln's Inn, and there, by an act of conscience he would not be able to explain to himself for 11 years, he left it. By Friday, the lady had quit the house. By the new year, a paragraph in the Morning Post announced that the Duchess of Markby was sojourning indefinitely upon the continent for the benefit of her constitution, and the world of St. James's, which had 100 newer scandals to consume, forgot her within a fortnight. The Duke did not forget her. He simply put the thought of her into a room within himself and turned the key, and after a time the door of that room was lacquered over by the demands of the estate and the duties of the lords, and he ceased to know that the room was there. He was called the Ice Duke by those who admired him and by those who feared him, which were the same persons, and at 33 he was reckoned the most eligible widower in fact in England, though he had no wife buried and no wife mentioned. 4 years later, in the spring of the year 1822, a small bell tinkled above the door of a milliner's shop in a side street off Marylebone High Street, and the rain that fell that afternoon was a softer rain, and the woman who sat at the back counter trimming a bonnet of black chip straw for 3 pence the trimming did not, at first, look up. The shop served upper servants and the widows of curates. Its window displayed 3 bonnets, a length of mourning crepe, and a card lettered in a small, precise hand. Repairs undertaken. A curtain of unbleached calico filtered the afternoon to the color of weak tea. She wore a gown of dust-gray wool, cut high beneath the bosom, long sleeves close to the wrist, a collar of plain white linen buttoned to the throat. A brown shawl of coarser wool was looped twice at her shoulders against the draught from the door. Her cotton gloves she had peeled back from the fingers to allow the needle its work, and her hands were a working woman's hands now, the knuckles a little reddened, a callus risen at the inner edge of the right thumb where the thimble sat. Her copper hair, which she could not subdue, had been knotted low at the nape under a cap of starched linen, and a few strands had escaped across her temples and burned there in the gloom, like the embers of a fire that would not consent to be put out. Upon a square of carpet at her feet, beside the counter, sat a small boy of 3 years. He was small for his age, slight in the shoulders, with hair as black as the wing of a rook, and skin so pale it would freckle in a single hour of sun. His eyes, when he raised them, were not his mother's. They were gray, a clean cold gray, the gray of a saber held against a window in winter. He wore brown serge breeches and a white shirt with a little upstanding collar, a gray waistcoat of his mother's making, a small navy coat with 3 black buttons. A lamb of patched calico had lost most of its stuffing about the throat, and he held it now by one ear and made it walk, slowly, along the iron leg of the counter-stool. "Edmund," she said, without looking down, "if you walk him into the basin, you must fetch him out yourself." "He is climbing the hill," said the boy. "Then he must mind the summit." He laughed once, the small clean laugh of a child at his own joke, and in his right cheek a single dimple appeared, and did not leave him for some seconds after. She glanced down at it. She always glanced down at it. She had learned, 4 years since, not to allow the glance to last. The needle resumed. The black silk ribbon caught the light at each pass. She was finishing the small rosette that would sit above the left ear of the bonnet, and the woman who had ordered it was the wife of a tobacconist in Wigmore Street, and would call for it at 6 o'clock, and the 3 pence she would lay upon the counter would, together with the 11 pence already in the tin behind the till, pay for the boy's milk and for the loaf and for the half candle they would burn that evening, and there would, even, be a farthing put by toward the rent. She had learned in 4 years to count in farthings without bitterness. Bitterness, she had discovered, cost a farthing also, and she could not afford it. The bell above the door went a second time. A maidservant in a wet pelisse fetched the bonnet ordered the week before, paid, and went. The bell went a third time, and an elderly clergyman in a damp cassock asked whether his daughter's straw might be reblocked by Saturday, and was told that it might, and went also, and the shop was quiet again, and the rain upon the cobbles of the side street sounded like the falling of a great many small coins. Wilmot set down the bonnet. She rose, She crossed to the little iron stove at the back where a kettle sang low and made for the boy a cup of warm milk diluted with hot water and a piece of bread the size of his palm, and she set them upon the stool beside him. He drank without speaking. He had learned, almost before he had learned to walk, that he was not to chatter while his mother sewed. She returned to the counter. She did not, immediately, take up the bonnet. She reached, instead, into the inner pocket of her gown, and from it she drew a letter. It was sealed with red wax, and in the wax was pressed the device of 3 falcons rising, the arms of the house of Beaumont, her father's house, abolished by attainder in 1813, when her father, Frederick, Viscount Beaumont, had been ruined by a charge of treasonous correspondence with the French, and had died of a fever in the Marshalsea within the year, and her mother had followed him within the 12-month, and Wilmot at 13 had been taken into the household of the Dowager Countess of Quendon, her godmother, and from there, at 17, had been married, very brilliantly and very briefly, into the Wandesford line. The seal had been pressed by a hand that had been passed steady. The wax had run a little to the left. She turned the letter in her fingers. The address upon the face of it had been written by her Aunt Caroline Beaumont, her father's only sister, a maiden lady of 62 years, who had kept a small house at Hereford upon an annuity of £70, and a packet of letters tied with green ribbon at the bottom of an oak chest. The address read in a hand grown thin with age, "To His Grace the Duke of Markby," into his own hands, and beneath it, in a hand grown thinner still, "By the hand of my niece, before the Friday next ensuing." Aunt Caroline had been buried at Hereford 11 days since. The packet had been brought to the milliner's shop by the rector himself upon the Monday morning, together with a copy of the will. The will had left to Wilmot 1 silver tea caddy, a Bible bound in calf, the small Persian carpet from the parlor, £63 in the 3 per cents, and a sealed letter to be carried into the hand of His Grace the Duke of Markby, before the Friday next ensuing, failing which the sum and the residue were to pass to a charity for the daughters of decayed clergymen at Bath. It was the Wednesday afternoon. The Friday was the day after tomorrow. She had not opened the letter. She did not know what was in it. Her aunt had been a careful woman, and what was sealed had been sealed for a reason. And Wilmot, who in 4 years had not written so much as a folded square of paper to the man whose ring she still wore upon a tarnished silver chain beneath the linen at her throat, had no intention of breaking another woman's seal to spare herself the carrying of it. But the carrying of it was another matter. The carrying of it required that she walk, openly, to the door of Markby House in Grosvenor Square, and ask, in the hearing of his servants, that the letter be put into his hand. She had not been within sight of that door since she had walked out of it 4 years before with her traveling case and her grandmother's locket and the unborn child whose existence she had not yet had time to declare. She set her 2 hands flat upon the counter, one upon either side of the letter, and she stood so for a long moment, while behind her the kettle pursued its small, unconcerned note, and at her feet the boy walked his lamb up the iron leg of the stool, and the rain in the side street ran clear in the gutter. "Mamma," said Edmund, in his small, deliberate voice, "are we going out?" She looked down at him. The gray eyes had lifted from the lamb to her face, with the patient attentiveness of a child who has learned to read a face very well, because no other face is offered him to read. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "through the park, to feed the ducks." Among other things, he considered this. He approved of it. He returned to his lamb. She drew a breath that filled her, slowly, to the throat, and she set the letter back into the inner pocket of her gown, and she took up the bonnet again, and the rosette of black ribbon resumed its slow turning beneath her needle. She did not weep. She had wept in the year 1818 from October to December, and at the end of December she had risen one morning in the small back bedroom of her aunt's cottage at Hereford, very large with the child she now believed to be a girl, and she had said aloud, to no one but the brown wallpaper and the chest of drawers, "I shall not do this again." She had not done it again. Instead, she had cut up her 2 silk gowns for the lining of a coverlet, sold the pearl eardrops her father had given her at 15, taken the name of her mother's people, which was Beaumont also, and therefore answered to her own conscience, and engaged herself by post to a milliner of Bristol who required a girl who could trim. By the time Edmund was born, in a brass bed in a room above a chandler's shop, with the doctor's bill paid in advance from the sale of the locket and the chain replaced with one of plain silver, she had been Mrs. Beaumont for 5 months, and the household around her had grown used to the title. and the title fitted her as well as any other lie ever fits a person who has been compelled to lie. The death of the Bristol milliner the previous autumn had brought her back to London. She had taken the small shop with £60 her aunt had advanced her, and she lived above it in 2 rooms with a sloping ceiling, a single bed, a wooden cot beside it, which the boy was already beginning to outgrow. She had reckoned she might keep the shop solvent 2 years, perhaps 3, by which time he would be old enough for a charity school, and she would, if God were merciful, be permitted to keep him alive. She did not, in the ordinary run of things, think about His Grace the Duke of Markby. He had become to her a shape behind a closed door in a room she did not enter. She did not know that the bedroom that had been hers had been kept locked, the key in his own writing desk, the housekeeper instructed to dust it every Tuesday. She did not know that his mother, the dowager, had died of an apoplexy in 1820, and that on the morning after the funeral he had walked alone into the locked bedroom and stood there a quarter of an hour and walked out and locked it again. She knew only that the rain was lightening, that the rosette was finished, and that on the Friday next ensuing she would carry an unopened letter to a house she had no business approaching. She set the bonnet upon the wig stand. She turned it slowly to admire the work, because the work was good, and because she had taught herself, in 4 years, to admire good work for its own sake, as one of the small, honest pleasures that could not be taken from her. The bell above the door went a 4th time. A page boy in a green livery she did not recognize stood upon the threshold with a folded paper in his hand. He doffed his cap. "Mrs. Beaumont, by chance?" "I am Mrs. Beaumont." He held out the paper. "From Lady Quendon's house, ma'am. The footman is waiting." She took the paper. She did not at first open it. She had not heard from Honoria Quendon in 3 years and 4 months. She had written once from Bristol in the week of Edmund's birth to say that she was alive and that the child was alive, and Honoria had written back by return of post a letter of 3 pages full of love and indignation and the offer of a roof, and Wilmot, who could not at that time afford the love nor the indignation nor the roof, had answered in 8 lines that she was well, that she required nothing, that she begged her godmother to ask nothing further, and had not written since. She broke the seal. The letter was short. It said that the Countess of Quendon had taken a small house in Half Moon Street for the season, that she had heard from a milliner of her acquaintance certain particulars touching a copper-haired needlewoman in a side street off Marylebone, that she would be driving through Hyde Park on the morrow at the hour of 3, in the open landau, and that if a certain person were to walk along the Serpentine at that hour, with a certain small companion, the certain person would be observed to be observed, and might do as she chose. Wilmot read the letter twice. She folded it. She gave the page boy a penny from the tin behind the till, which she could not afford and which she did not regret, and she said, "Tell her ladyship I shall walk." The page bowed. The bell rang. The door closed. She stood with her hand upon the counter. The boy looked up at her gravely from beside his lamb. "Mamma," he said, "you look as if you had thought of something." "I have thought of something." "What?" She bent. She lifted him into her arms, which she did not often do during the working hours, because it was a privilege she rationed, and she set her cheek for one breath against the cool black silk of his hair. "I have thought," she said quietly, into the small clean shell of his ear, "that we shall do 2 things tomorrow. We shall walk in the park, and we shall carry a letter. And then, my love, the world will be as God pleases, and we shall be as we are." He did not understand her. He did not need to. He settled his head into the angle of her neck where it had always fitted, and he held his lamb between them, and outside, in the side street off Marylebone, the rain over the cobbles slackened and ceased, and a thin, pale sun cut for one moment through the cloud, and laid across the floor of the small shop a single yellow bar of light that passed across the counter, across the unopened letter in the pocket of her gown, and across the small dimple in the cheek of the boy in her arms, and did not, even for that moment, divide them. She set him down. She returned to her work. At 6 o'clock the tobacconist's wife came and was pleased, and laid 3 pence upon the counter, and went away with the bonnet in a paper. At 7 the shop was shut, the shutters drawn, the bolt thrown. At 7:30 the boy was washed, and fed, and prayed, and laid in the cot beside the bed. At 8 she sat by the small fire in the upper room with the unopened letter upon her knee, and her sewing untouched in the basket at her foot, and she did not read it, and she did not weep, and presently she rose and put it back into the pocket of the gown that hung behind the door, and she went to bed. She did not sleep at once. She lay upon her side in the narrow bed and watched, by the small red light of the banked fire, the rise and fall of the child's breathing beneath the patched coverlet of the cot, and she thought, with the clear, cold, practical mind she had taught herself in 4 years, of the door in Grosvenor Square, and of the bell pull at the side entry, and of the words she would use to the servant who came, and of the gloves she would wear, and of the bonnet, and of whether the boy would be safer left at the shop with the laundress's daughter or carried with her into the park. She decided that he would be carried with her into the park. She did not, in that decision, calculate that a child of 3 years with the grey eyes of the Wandesford line and a single dimple in his right cheek walked at a stranger's hand along the Serpentine at the hour of 3 upon a fair afternoon in the spring of 1822 was a fact in the world that could not, by anyone who knew the Wandesfords, be undone again. She did not calculate it because in 4 years she had taught herself not to. She had taught herself to walk forward into the next hour with the small, honest courage of a woman who has no margin for the larger courage. She had carried the letter because the letter must be carried. She would walk in the park because Honoria Quendon, who had loved her since she was 13, had asked her to walk in the park, and what came of it would come. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep until the watchman in the street below had cried 11 o'clock. When she did sleep, she dreamed, as she had dreamed perhaps 3 nights in every 10 for 4 years, of a man's hand holding a quill above a sheet of foolscap, and not, in the dream, descending, and she woke a little before 5, and the dream went from her, as such dreams do, and she lay for a quarter of an hour in the dark listening to the boy's breathing, and then she rose, and lit the candle, and dressed, and went down to lay the fire in the shop. The day that was beginning was the Thursday. Upon the Friday, 2 days hence, at the hour of 4 in the afternoon, Sir Harrington Garrard of Garrard and Company, jewellers to His Majesty, of Panton Street and of Bond Street, would lay upon a square of black velvet in a private parlour above his Bond Street shop, for the inspection of His Grace the Duke of Markby and of the family of Lord Maurice Wentworth, Marquess of Bridges, a betrothal ring of a single square emerald set within a circle of brilliants, being the twin and the match of a ring he had delivered into the same hand in the autumn of 1818. Of this, that morning, in the side street off Marylebone, the woman laying the small fire in the milliner's shop knew nothing at all. She knew only that the rain had ceased in the night, that the day promised fair, and that at 3 in the afternoon, with a clean apron and a brushed bonnet and a small boy by the hand, she would walk along the Serpentine in Hyde Park, and carry in the inner pocket of her grey gown an unopened letter sealed with the device of 3 falcons rising, and that whatever was written in it had been written by a dying woman who had loved her, and had been written with a purpose, and would have, when it was read, the consequences that it would have. She laid the kindling, she struck the flint. The small flame caught, and spread, and lit her face from beneath, and showed for an instant, in the cold grey eye of the looking-glass propped above the counter, a young woman of 22 years, with a clean jaw and a steady mouth and copper hair half-pinned, who looked, in that uncertain light, as a portrait might look that had been carried for 4 years in the lining of a travelling case and only now, by some accident, drawn out and set against the wall. She did not pause to look at herself. She had no time for portraits. She set the kettle. She opened the shutters. The first thin grey of the London morning fell across the counter and across the small square of carpet where the boy would sit with his lamb. The letter was in her pocket. Friday was coming. The bell of St. Marylebone struck 9, and Wilmot was already on the pavement with Edmund's small hand swallowed inside her own. She had risen before the milk cart, mended the seam under her arm by the light of a single tallow stub, and counted the coins in the chipped teacup 3 times. 11 pence, enough for a slice of bread on the way home, if she walked instead of took the omnibus. The walk was 3 miles. Edmund's legs would last 2. She had decided already. She would carry him the last one. "Mamma," he said, dragging his wooden lamb along the railings so the head bounced. "Are we going to the river?" "Through the park, my love, to deliver a letter." "To who?" "To a gentleman who does not yet know he is waiting for it." He considered this with the grave attention only a child of 3 can muster, and was satisfied. The November air still carried last night's rain. Hyde Park lay under a thin grey vapour that softened the railings and the elms and the distant horsemen into a watercolour gone too wet at the edges. Wilmot kept to the inner path where the gravel was firm. She did not walk like a duchess. She walked like a tradeswoman with a destination. Head down, pace brisk, eyes on the ground 3 steps ahead. The bonnet hid her hair entirely. The grey wool drank the light. She had taught herself this gait in the first year, and it had saved her many small humiliations since. The letter was in her pocket. Friday was coming. That sentence had repeated itself in her head from Marylebone to the Cumberland Gate, and now it had begun to repeat in the rhythm of her steps. Friday, coming, Friday, coming. A nursery maid passed with two small girls in pink pelisses, and the maid's eyes flicked over Wilmot's gray wool, and then through her, as servants of servants do. Wilmot felt nothing at that. She had been looked through by better than nursery maids. Edmund stopped at a puddle. He crouched to inspect his own reflection with the seriousness of a magistrate. "There I am," he announced. "There you are, and there you are, and there I am." He laughed, that one quick laugh that made the dimple appear in his right cheek and nowhere else. Wilmot's hand tightened on his shoulder for a half-second before she let go. They walked on. She heard the carriage before she saw it. Spring bar wheels on damp gravel make a particular tone. Lower, fatter, more confident than a hired vehicle. The horses were trotting smartly. Wilmot stepped instinctively to the verge and turned Edmund's shoulder behind her skirt. The carriage was a barouche. The hood was down despite the cold. The Quendon arms were painted on the door, faded now, where the lacquer had cracked, but unmistakable to anyone who had grown up reading crests. Black on silver, a stag's head erased, 3 mullets in chief. Wilmot read it, and her throat closed. Inside sat a small, fat woman in widow's silk the color of dried blackberry, a black turban with a single sable feather, and a tortoise-shell quizzing glass, already lifted to one black eye. The carriage was slowing. Wilmot turned her face hard towards the railings and pretended to adjust Edmund's collar. "Halt, Coggins," came the voice from the barouche. Wilmot closed her eyes. "Halt," I said. "Are you deaf, man, or only stupid?" The wheels stopped. Wilmot heard the small fat woman descend with the help of a footman, heard the silk crackle, heard the cane strike gravel twice, once for balance, once for emphasis. "Child," said Lady Honoria Quendon at her elbow. "Turn around." Wilmot did not. "Turn around, Wilmot, before I make a scene." The Christian name in the open park was a small detonation. Wilmot turned. The dowager was shorter than Wilmot remembered. She had not seen her godmother in 4 years. Lady Honoria's painted patch sat exactly where it had always sat, on the upper rise of the left cheek, and her white hair was still piled in the old French manner, powdered against the fashion of the new decade. Only the eyes had changed. The black had gone glossier, the way old eyes go when they have learned to weep without warning. For a long moment the two women only looked at each other. Lady Honoria's quizzing glass dropped to her bosom. Her gloved hand rose, hovered, and did not quite touch Wilmot's face. "Sweet Christ in heaven," she said softly, "it is you, madam. Do not madam me. Do not. I cannot speak with you here. You will speak with me here, or in my carriage, or in my house in Grosvenor Square, but you will speak with me." The cane struck the gravel again. "Choose." Edmund, behind his mother's skirt, leaned out to inspect the strange shouting lady. He had inherited from his father a habit of looking first and deciding second. He looked. The dimple appeared once, on the right cheek only, and then his small mouth closed in a perfect line, and he stepped back to study her with cold gray eyes. Lady Honoria saw the dimple. She saw the eyes. The color left her face in a single slow tide, from the painted patch downward, and the gloved hand that had been hovering near Wilmot's cheek dropped to grip the head of the cane so hard the kidskin creaked. She did not speak for the space of 3 breaths. Then, very quietly, "How old is he?" 3 years and 4 months. "And his name?" "Edmund Beaumont, in the parish register." "Edmund," repeated Lady Honoria. The single word was an inventory. She knew the name. Every godmother in Mayfair knew the name. The first male child of every Duke of Markby for 2 centuries had been baptized Edmund. The second sons were Godfrey's. The third sons were George. It was the kind of thing children of that class learned the way other children learned hymns. Wilmot saw the recognition land and did not soften it. "Madam," she said, "I have an errand in Mayfair. If you wish to speak with me, you will have to walk a little. I will do better than that. You will get into my carriage." "I will not, Wilmot. Madam, in this dress and this bonnet, I am invisible. In your carriage, I am a curiosity. I have spent 4 years making myself nothing to look at. I do not undo it in a morning." Lady Honoria considered her. The black eyes ran from the bonnet to the gloves to the cracked boots. and then back up to Wilmot's face and stayed there a long moment, and the quizzing glass came up again and dropped again, because it was not needed. "Then I shall walk," said the dowager. "Coggins, follow at 20 paces. Take the child up if he tires." "He will not tire," said Wilmot. "He is 3. He will tire. Take him up, Coggins, when he tires." The footman bowed. The horses moved off at the slowest walk a coachman could persuade them to. Lady Honoria put her gloved hand through the crook of Wilmot's free arm and began to walk beside her on the gravel path, as if they were two old friends out for the morning, which from a distance, in that park, in that hour, they almost were. For some yards neither of them spoke. The dowager's breath came short. She was not built for walking. Edmund trotted on Wilmot's other side, the lamb dragging. "Where are you living?" said Lady Honoria at last. "Marylebone, off Paddington Street. There is a milliner who lets me a back room for 3 shillings a week and the use of her bench. Sweet Christ! It is dry and the lock holds. I have known worse. You have not. I have. The first winter I had worse." The dowager closed her eyes for a half step. "Why did you not come to me?" "Because you would have written to him." "I would not." "You would. Out of love for me, you would. You would have thought he had a right to know, and you would have written, and he would not have answered, and that silence would have killed me. So I did not come." Lady Honoria did not deny it. She walked a few paces and then said, "I want to hit you. I want to take this stick and hit you across the shoulders for not coming. I know. I want to weep. I want to lie down in this gravel and weep until the keepers carry me out. I know. And I want to wring his neck. Both your necks. All 3 of yours, including the small one." Here she glanced down at Edmund, who was watching her with grave attention, and her voice cracked. "Especially the small one. The small one has done nothing, and yet he is the worst of you." Wilmot's hand tightened on Edmund's. "Madam, the errand." "Yes, the errand. What is the errand?" "My Aunt Beaumont, who died at Michaelmas, left a letter under seal to be delivered to a gentleman by Friday at the latest. The will is precise on the day. I am the executrix in everything but name. I have until Friday." "Which gentleman?" Wilmot did not answer. The dowager stopped walking. The cane stopped. Coggins, 20 paces behind, halted the horses with a soft click of the tongue. "Which gentleman, Wilmot?" "You know which. Say it." "His Grace the Duke of Markby." Lady Honoria's free hand rose to her own throat and stayed there. "Child," she said, "you cannot. I must. By the terms of the will, I must. Wilmot, listen to me. Listen carefully. You cannot go to Markby House this week. Not this week." "Why not this week?" The dowager's hand on her arm tightened until it almost hurt. "Because on Friday afternoon," she said, very evenly, "His Grace the Duke of Markby will receive at Gerrard's of Bond Street the betrothal ring of his house, to be presented that same evening to his promised wife, the Lady Cassandra Wentworth, eldest daughter of the Marquis of Bridges. The announcement was in the Gazette on Tuesday. The vouchers have gone out for the breakfast. It is to be the marriage of the season." The gravel under Wilmot's boots seemed to tip very slowly. She did not allow it to. She had practiced, over 4 years, the trick of refusing to fall when the ground asked her to. She drew one breath through her nose, set her teeth, and remained upright on the path with her son's hand in her own. Edmund, who could not have understood a word, looked up at his mother's face and went very still. "I see," said Wilmot. "You see nothing of the sort. You do not see at all, Wilmot. You are still. Do not say it in the park, madam." "I will say it in the park if I must. You are still, madam." The cane struck the gravel once, hard. "Then I will not say it. But you know what you are, and you know what that child is. And I tell you now, on the soul of your mother, who was my dearest friend in this world, you will not deliver a letter from a dead woman to that man on the eve of his betrothal in the public street like a beggar. You will not. It is not in the public street. It is at his door. It is worse at his door. Madam, by Friday at 5 o'clock, the seal of that letter must be in his hand, or my aunt's bequest collapses, and with it, the only sum that stands between this child and the parish school. I do not have the luxury of pride. I had pride once. I have a son now." Lady Honoria looked down at Edmund again. The dimple was nowhere. He had inherited his father's stillness as well as his eyes. "How much?" said the dowager. "I beg your pardon? How much is the bequest? Name it. I will write a draft on whores this afternoon." "No, Wilmot. No, madam, I love you for offering. I will not take it. The letter is not about money. My aunt did not leave money. She left something else, and the law is precise that it must reach his hand, by Friday, under seal, unopened. I do not know what is in it. I have not broken the wax. I have only the wax to deliver. You have not opened it. I have not. She bound me by her last breath. I held her hand when she made me swear. The dowager said nothing for a moment. Then her gloved fingers found Wilmot's and squeezed once, very hard. Then deliver the cursed thing on Thursday, she said. Thursday morning, before the ring, at the back door of Markby House, into the hand of Mr. Fenwick, the solicitor, who is a decent man, and who will see it placed before his grace, before he leaves for Bond Street. Do not wait for Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon you will pass that shop and you will see her on his arm, and the thing inside you that is still standing will fall down at last. I will not have you in the street at that hour. I forbid it. You cannot forbid me anything, madam. I can forbid you nothing. I beg you. Thursday morning. Promise me Thursday morning. Wilmot looked at her godmother. The black eyes were full now. The painted patch had begun to smudge at one edge from a stray tear the dowager would die before acknowledging. Thursday morning, said Wilmot. Swear it. I swear it. On the child. On the child. The dowager exhaled. She closed her eyes a second and put her free hand to her own breast, as if checking that the heart still beat there. Then she opened her eyes and they were dry again, and her voice was the voice of the woman who had once managed an embassy in Vienna. Now, she said, you will come to Quentin House tonight, you and the child. There is an annex behind the stables. 2 rooms, clean, warm, with a fire and a door that locks from the inside. It was the governess's. I have no governess now. The staff are old and discreet, and 3 of them remember you as a girl and would die before they spoke a word. You will sleep there tonight and tomorrow and Thursday and Friday, and as many nights after as it takes for this matter to find its bottom. You will not refuse me this. If you refuse me this, I shall have Coggins put you in the carriage by force, and I shall weep before the Bow Street magistrate myself and swear you mad, and I shall be believed, because I am rich and old. Do not refuse me, madam, do not refuse me. Wilmot looked down at Edmund. His cheeks were pink with the cold. The wooden lamb had a fresh smear of mud along its flank. He had been walking for nearly an hour, and his small breath was coming faster than it should, and there were 3 more miles between this gravel path and the room in Marylebone, and the room in Marylebone had a chimney that smoked, and a window that let in November. She thought of the fire in the annex. She thought of clean linen. She thought of a door that locked from the inside. She thought of how a child sleeps when he is warm. Madam, she said, I accept. For the child. Not for me. For the child. I shall pretend to believe you. The dowager turned and lifted her cane. Coggins brought the barouche up at once. In, said Lady Honoria. Both of you. The boy on my lap. You opposite, where I can look at you. We shall fetch your things from Marylebone on the way. Whatever they are, I have no doubt they will fit in a single bandbox, and I shall weep over that bandbox in private for an hour tonight. But you will not see it. In. Edmund allowed himself to be lifted into the carriage by the footman with the gravity of a small ambassador. He settled himself on the dowager's lap and inspected the sable feather of her turban with one careful finger. She let him. She did not look at him. She was afraid, Wilmot saw, of looking at him in full light. The barouche pulled away at a walk. Wilmot sat opposite with her hands folded in the gray wool of her lap and the letter still in her pocket. Through the bare elms the autumn sun came briefly, struck the painted Quendon arms on the door, and made the silver flash once. Across the park, on the broad ride, a pair of horsemen passed at a smart canter. Wilmot did not look at them. She had taught herself, over 4 years, not to look at any horseman in Hyde Park in case he should be the one. She had not broken the habit in a single morning. The habit would break itself, on Friday, in front of a jeweler's window. She did not know that yet. Lady Honoria leaned a little towards her across the carriage and said, in the voice one uses for small private decisions, "Tonight I shall send for Mr. Heatherset, my own solicitor. Quietly. He will sit with us after the child is asleep. He will tell us what your standing is, and what the boy's standing is, and what may be done that is not what your aunt's letter does. Do not protest. I do not propose to interfere with the letter. I propose only to know the ground I am walking on. Madam, and on Friday at 5 o'clock, continued Lady Honoria as if she had not heard, you and I shall be at home, with the door bolted and the curtains drawn, and a very good claret open, and we shall not speak of Bond Street, and we shall not speak of jewelers, and we shall play backgammon with the child, until he falls asleep across the board. That is what we shall do on Friday at 5 o'clock. Is that understood? Yes, madam. Good. Because if I find you at 5 o'clock on Friday standing in the street outside Gerard's with that bonnet pulled down over your eyes, I shall not weep, child. I shall be very angry indeed. Yes, madam. Very angry. Yes, madam. The dowager nodded once and turned her face to the window. Her gloved hand, however, found Wilmot's across the carriage and stayed there, and Wilmot let it stay, because she had not been touched by a hand that knew her name in 4 years, and the body remembers what the mind has trained itself to forget. They drove out by Cumberland Gate. The bell of St. George's was striking 10. Marylebone was reached. The bandbox was packed in 11 minutes. The milliner watching with her mouth open and a half-pinned bonnet still on her wig block. And by noon the barouche was turning into the gates of Quendon House on Grosvenor Square. The annex behind the stables was opened. A fire was lit. A copper bath was brought. Edmund, who had never seen a copper bath, sat in it for 40 minutes and laughed until the dimples stayed visible for whole minutes at a time. Wilmot sat on the floor beside the bath in a clean, dry dress lent by the housekeeper's daughter, and washed her son's hair with rosewater, and did not weep, because she had promised herself in the first winter that she would never weep in front of him, and she had kept that promise for 3 years, and she was not going to break it on a Tuesday afternoon in November in a house on Grosvenor Square. Lady Honoria, in her own drawing-room 200 yards away, wept enough for both of them. The dowager wept first into her handkerchief, then into the sleeve of her widow's silk, then into the head of her cane. When she was finished, she rang for her writing case. She sat at the bureau in the window and she wrote, in the firm hand of a woman who had once corresponded with Talleyrand, 3 notes. The first was to Mr. Heatherset, her solicitor, summoning him to Quendon House at 8 o'clock that evening on a matter of the gravest discretion. The second was to her own physician, Dr. Pollexfen, requesting that he attend a child of 3 in the annex the following morning, quietly, by the garden gate. The third she wrote, hesitated over, read twice, folded, and held a long moment above the candle without sealing it. It was addressed to His Grace the Duke of Markby, at Markby House, St. James's Square. She held it above the flame. The wax in the dish had melted. The Quendon seal, 3 mullets in chief, lay ready at her hand. The note inside was 4 lines only, and it said nothing that could not be said in 4 lines. She held it. She thought of Wilmot's face in the park. She thought of the dimple on the boy's right cheek. She thought of the promise she had given on the gravel. Thursday morning, Mr. Fenwick, the back door. She thought of her oldest, dearest friend, dead these 8 years, and of what that friend would have said to her now if she were sitting in the chair opposite. Lady Honoria Quendon laid the unsealed note flat upon the bureau. She picked up the wax. She did not seal it. She set the note instead into the back of the writing case, behind the blotter, where the maid would not find it, and she closed the lid, and she turned the small brass key, and she put the key inside the bodice of her dress. Not yet, she said aloud, to no one. Not by my hand, and not yet. The child swore on the child. So shall I. Outside, in the annex, Edmund had fallen asleep in clean sheets for the first time in his short life, with the wooden lamb tucked under his chin, and his small breath even at last. Wilmot sat beside the bed with her hand on his ankle through the blanket. The letter from her aunt lay on the deal table by the candle, the Beaumont wax unbroken, the direction in her aunt's spidery hand, to His Grace the Duke of Markby, by his own hand, before sundown Friday. She did not look at the letter. She looked at her son. Thursday morning, she thought. Mr. Fenwick, the back door, and then home, and then quiet, and then never again, and the bequest into the bank, and the child into a school where no one knows the name, and a small house at the seaside, perhaps, in 2 years, if the work holds. She had a plan. It was a good plan. It accounted for everything she could see. It did not account for the fact that on a bureau in Grosvenor Square, behind a blotter, locked away by a brass key inside a dowager's bodice, lay an unsealed note that would not be sent, and that the seal she had refused to break that night was, by Thursday afternoon, going to be broken by someone else entirely, in a candle-lit study on St. James's Square, by a man with a cavalry scar on his jaw and a signet ring on his left little finger, who had not slept properly in 4 years, and did not yet know why. Outside the annex window, The lamps were being lit one by one along Grosvenor Square. Inside, the child slept. The mother kept her hand on his ankle. The Beaumont seal waited on the table, unbroken, beside a single candle, 3 days from Friday. The rain over Mayfair came down in thin gray sheets that Thursday afternoon, and Wilmot Beaumont walked through it with her head bent and the sealed letter pressed flat against her ribs beneath the brown wool shawl. Edmund kept pace at her hip, his small hands swallowed in hers, the rag lamb tucked under his other arm with its head hanging loose. He did not ask where they were going. He had learned, in 3 short years, not to ask. She turned out of Oxford Street and into the quieter pavements of Hanover Square, then west along Brook Street, and the houses grew taller and whiter and more silent at every corner. By the time she reached Grosvenor Square, the rain had thickened to a steady, dignified drizzle, the kind that did not bother the great houses, only the people walking past them. Markby House stood on the north side of the square behind iron railings tipped in gold. 4 stories of pale stone, 6 tall windows across, a portico of Doric columns, 2 liveried footmen visible through the fanlight, a coat of arms over the door, a stag, crowned. She knew that stag. She had once worn it, very briefly, on a signet ring on a ribbon at her throat. She did not look at the front door. She walked the railings to the corner, turned down the mews, and counted 3 gates until she found the service entrance. A narrow black door set into the area wall, below pavement level, with a brass bell pull worn smooth by tradesmen's hands. Wilmot drew Edmund close against her skirts and pulled the bell. A bootboy of perhaps 14 opened the door with a piece of bread in his hand. He took one look at her cheap wool, her wet bonnet, the child clinging to her hem, and assumed the obvious. "No alms at this door, missus. Round to the steward's lodge. Tuesdays. I am not begging." Her voice was low and even. "I have a letter for His Grace the Duke of Markby. It is to be delivered into his hands by Friday, by order of the Reverend Hawes of Canvahangle, executor of the will of Miss Almeria Beaumont." The boy blinked. "Letter for the Duke. Into his hands. Most letters go through Mr. Fenwick, missus. This one will. But Mr. Fenwick will see, when he breaks the outer cover, that it must travel 1 floor higher. Tell him it is from a Beaumont of Monmouthshire, sealed with the Beaumont swan, and that the testator died on the 17th of April." The boy's eyes shifted, because he had been trained to recognize certain tones. The tone of a woman who was not, despite the wool, what she appeared to be. "Name, missus?" She had prepared this. She gave him her mother's maiden name, Mrs. Beaumont, of the city. He took the letter as if it might bite. It was a thick packet of folded parchment sealed in black wax with the swan pressed clean. He waited on his palm. "I'll see it goes up," he said, and then, because he had a kind streak even in livery, "Will you wait, missus? It is wet." "No. There is no answer expected." She turned away before he could close the door, drew Edmund up against her side again, and walked back up the area steps into the rain. She did not look at the windows of Markby House. She had taught herself not to look at certain windows, certain colors, certain crests, for nearly 4 years. She would not undo that training in the last hour. Edmund tugged her hand once they reached the square. "Mama, the man took my paper." "It was Mama's paper, sweetheart. It belonged to Aunt Almeria, who is gone. The man will give it to the right person, and then we shall go and have soup at the chop house, and you may have a piece of bread to feed the pigeons." "With currants?" "With currants." He was satisfied. The rain ran off the brim of his small cap, and he reached up and patted her cold cheek with his cold hand, and she carried his pity with her all the way back to Marylebone, without weeping, because weeping was a habit she had broken on the day Almeria's letter first arrived. By 4:30 she was bent over a half-finished bonnet at the millinery counter, threading rose-colored ribbon through a row of stitches that had to be perfect, or Mrs. Coppock would dock her 3d. Edmund slept under the counter on a folded apron. The bell over the shop door rang and rang. She did not lift her head once. In Grosvenor Square the letter rose. It rose through the hands of the boot-boy, who passed it to the under-butler, who passed it to the upper-butler, who passed it to Mr. Pinch's, the house steward, who recognized the swan at one glance, and carried it himself across the marble hall and up the grand staircase to the 1st floor. There he hesitated outside the door of the small library, where the Duke did his evening correspondence, and changed his mind. He went back down 1 flight, crossed to the east wing, and laid the packet on the silver salver of Mr. Ambrose Fenwick, the Duke's personal solicitor. who maintained a permanent chamber at Markby House. Fenwick was at supper, alone, with a plate of cold mutton and a glass of claret he had no intention of finishing. He saw the swan. He set the fork down very carefully. He had not seen that seal since the spring of 1813. He cut the wax with a small ivory knife. Inside the outer cover lay a second packet, this one sealed in red, and a single sheet of unfolded paper bearing 4 lines in a thin, elderly hand. To Mr. Ambrose Fenwick, in trust. The enclosed is for the eyes of the Duke of Markby alone, and is to be placed in his hand this same night, before he retires. The undersigned is past the reach of legal compulsion, being already dead. Almeria Beaumont. Fenwick read it twice. He pushed his plate aside. He had served the house of Markby for 11 years. He had never, in those 11 years, disturbed his Grace after the closing of the evening dispatch box. He kept the rule because his Grace had requested it, in writing, on the day Fenwick was sworn into the post. The rule had survived a French invasion scare, a fire in the wine cellar, and the death of the old dowager. It had never been broken. He broke it that night at 20 minutes past 10. He found the Duke in the small library, in shirt sleeves and the grey silk waistcoat, reading a report on the drainage of the Yorkshire estates by the light of 3 candles. The Duke did not look up at the knock. "It is past my hour, Fenwick. Your Grace, forgive me." A sealed packet, delivered this afternoon to the service door by a person calling herself Mrs. Beaumont, addressed to your hand alone, under cover of a directive signed by Miss Almeria Beaumont of Monmouthshire, who died on the 17th of April. The Duke's pen stopped on the page. He did not lift his head for a long moment. When he did, his face had the stillness it wore at cabinet meetings and at funerals. "Beaumont. Yes, your Grace. Place it on the desk. Withdraw. Wait in the antechamber." Fenwick set the red-sealed packet on the green leather, bowed, and withdrew. He shut the door without sound. In the antechamber he sat upon a small gilt chair and rested his hands flat upon his knees and waited, and was not surprised when, 18 minutes later, the bell rang twice. He came back in. The Duke was standing at the window with his back to the room. The packet lay open on the desk. 3 receipts in different inks, 2 letters in a hand Fenwick recognized, because he had seen it on 12 years of obsequious notes from Bridges House, and a single sheet of magistrate's attestation, signed by 2 names of unimpeachable standing in the county of Monmouth. The Duke spoke without turning. "Read them." Fenwick read. He read slowly, because the documents were not long but their architecture was exact. A bill of exchange dated the 12th of February 1813, drawn upon the Bank of Coutts in the sum of £400, payable to one Jean-Baptiste Lacourt of Calais, signed and endorsed by Lord Maurice Wentworth, Marquess of Bridges. A second draft, drawn on the same date, for £150, payable to a copyist in Soho, whose name had appeared in the trial papers of the Viscount Beaumont in May of that year. A letter from Bridges to Lacourt, instructing him to provide, within the month, 3 documents in the Viscount's hand, which would suggest, but not prove, treasonous correspondence with the French ministry. A second letter, from Bridges to the copyist, instructing him to produce a fair facsimile of the Viscount's signature suitable for application to the Lacourt papers. A third receipt, scrawled in Lacourt's careful hand, acknowledging delivery in May. The Viscount Beaumont had been Wilmot's father. The trial had ruined him. He had died of apoplexy 4 months after the verdict, leaving a widow who lived 6 months longer, and a daughter of 14 who was sent to the country to be raised by a maiden aunt called Almeria. Fenwick finished reading. He laid the papers flat upon the desk. He waited. The Duke turned at last. "The Marquess of Bridges, the father of Lady Cassandra Wentworth." "Yes, your Grace." "To whom my engagement is to be announced upon Friday next." "Yes, your Grace." A silence. The Duke's hand rested on the back of a chair. The knuckles whitened, then released. "And the directive from the late Miss Almeria Beaumont. By what right does she send me these?" Fenwick chose his words. "By the right, your Grace, of a woman who has held this evidence in a strong box in a Welsh parsonage for 9 years, and has determined, on her deathbed, to place it where it might do useful work. She did not address it to a magistrate. She addressed it to you." "Why to me?" Fenwick met the Duke's eye. He had been waiting 11 years for the question. "That, your Grace, is a matter on which I must beg leave to consult a second document." "What second document?" "The deed of separation," said Fenwick quietly, "executed in this house on the 7th of October 1818, between your Grace and the lady then your wife." The Duke went very still. The deed of separation was executed. It was drawn, Your Grace. It was signed by Your Grace. It was placed in the iron chest in this room for the lady's signature, which was to follow when she had been conveyed to her aunt in Monmouthshire. It has never been signed by the lady. It rests, this night, where it has rested for 3 years, 8 months, and 21 days, in the iron chest, unsigned. The Duke did not move. He did not move for what Fenwick afterwards thought was a full minute. The candles guttered in the draught from the window. "You will tell me," said the Duke at last, with great care, "that you have been aware of this fact, every day, for 3 years and 8 months. Every day, Your Grace," and said nothing. Your Grace was not to be spoken to upon the subject. Your Grace's instruction in October 1818 was that the lady's name was not to be uttered in this house upon any pretext save the production of her signature. I waited for the signature. It did not come. I therefore continued to wait. You should have laid the matter before me. Your Grace had forbidden it. You should have disobeyed. I am disobeying tonight, Your Grace. I shall not apologize for the timing. The Duke looked at his solicitor for a long, slow moment, and something in the iron face shifted by a degree no one in the household would have caught. But Fenwick caught it, because he had been watching that face for 11 years. "Bring the chest. At once, Your Grace." Fenwick fetched the small iron casket from the recess behind the bookshelves, set it upon the desk, opened it with the key from his own watch chain, and withdrew a folded document tied with white tape. He laid it before the Duke. The Duke untied the tape. He unfolded the deed. He turned to the second page. He found the line that bore his own signature, and beneath it the line that bore no signature at all, only a blank waiting space and the inked name Wilmot, Duchess of Markby, in Fenwick's careful clerical hand. He stared at the empty line. "In the eyes of the law," he said, very level. "In the eyes of the law, Your Grace, you have a wife. In the eyes of the Church. In the eyes of the Church, Your Grace, you have a wife. And the announcement of my engagement to Lady Cassandra is set for Friday at 3 in the afternoon at the rooms of Sir Harrington Gerard. Yes, Your Grace." Which would have constituted, had it gone forward in ignorance, the crime of bigamy. It would, Your Grace, by the daughter of the very man whose forged hand killed her father-in-law. The Duke closed the deed. He set his palm upon it. He looked at his hand a long time. "Fenwick, Your Grace, the woman who delivered the Beaumont packet today. The bootboy received her. Yes, Your Grace. You will find her. Yes, Your Grace. You will find her quietly. You will not approach her. You will not speak. You will discover her lodging, the name she uses, the work she does, the company she keeps, the church she attends, the place at which she takes her meals. You will discover every fact concerning her circumstances since the 7th of October, 1818. You will be back in this room by the hour of 3 tomorrow afternoon, with a written report. You will mention this errand to no one in this house, not the housekeeper, not Pinches, not the chaplain. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." "Go." Fenwick bowed and went. He left the receipts upon the desk. He left the deed upon the desk. He left the Duke standing with one hand flat upon his wife's unsigned name, and the candles burning low, and the rain still running in the gutters of Grosvenor Square. The Duke did not move for a quarter of an hour. Then he walked to the iron chest, looked into it, and saw what else lay there. A small package wrapped in tissue, tied with a black ribbon, undisturbed since the morning of the 8th of October, 1818. He had ordered it sealed up with the rest of her things and never quite given the order to send it after her. The package was very small, a silver hair ribbon, a child's prayer book that had been hers at 12, which she had brought into the marriage in a small valise, a signet ring on a thin chain, the crowned stag. He took the chain out. He held it in his palm. He weighed it. He did not speak. Across the river in Marylebone, Wilmot finished the bonnet by candlelight at midnight, took her 3d, wrapped Edmund in her shawl, and walked the 8 streets to the room she rented above a chandler's. She climbed the stairs without waking him. She laid him on the straw mattress and covered him with the brown blanket. She unpinned her hair and let the copper fall down her back, and she sat in the single chair by the cold grate, and she did not light the candle to save the tallow, and she said her prayers in the dark with her hands folded over the place where, beneath her shift, the silver ring she had never taken off hung between her breasts on a black cord. She did not know that its mate hung in another silver chain in a room in Grosvenor Square, at that same hour, in another set of hands. By 6 in the morning, Fenwick was at the chandler's door. He did not knock, he did not enter, He stood across the street in the fog with his hat pulled low and watched. At 7:15, a slim woman in gray wool came down the outer steps with a small, dark-haired child on her hip. She set the child down at the bottom of the steps. She straightened his cap. She took his hand. She walked east. He followed at 60 paces, the bag of papers under his arm, and noted every turning. He noted the milliner's shop on Wigmore Street, where she left the child with a pinched-faced woman in black and went in herself through the side door. He noted that she emerged at 12 for 10 minutes only, to feed the child a piece of bread soaked in milk on the curb. He noted that she returned, that she did not emerge again until 6. He noted that she carried home a parcel of cabbage and a small twist of tea, and nothing else. He noted the chandler again, the stairs, the single tallow window on the second floor that flickered a light at 8 and went dark at 10:30. He visited the parish clerk of St. Marylebone before the church closed for the night, paid a half-crown, and turned 3 pages back in the register of communicants. He found her name. He found it under Beaumont, Mrs., with the entry of Edmund Beaumont, infant, baptized by certificate. The certificate, the clerk said, had been brought from Wales. Wales. Fenwick took the night mail coach to Monmouth. He was back in Grosvenor Square by 3 the following afternoon, with a battered leather case under his arm, and 40 minutes of breath spent on the stairs. He laid the case on the Duke's desk. He took from it the report. He took also a second document, on parchment, folded once. The report, Your Grace. Read it. Fenwick read. The lodging above the chandler's, 14 shillings a month. The post at Coppock's Millinery in Wigmore Street, 3d. the bonnet, 6 bonnets the long day. The diet. The clothing. The single attendance at St. Marylebone Sunday morning. The absence of any visitor save once a quarter the elderly Reverend Hawes, executor of Miss Almeria's will, from Monmouth. The Duke listened. He did not interrupt. His face did not alter. The child. 3 years, Your Grace. Small for his age, but well-formed. Dark hair, very straight. The maid at the milliner's calls him Master Edmund. He carries a rag-lamb. He has, by the testimony of the parish clerk who baptized him at the chapel of Llanfihangel, a baptismal certificate. Fenwick placed the parchment upon the desk. And what does the parchment say? Your Grace will read it for yourself. The Duke unfolded it. He read the line and read it again, because the eye refuses, the second time, what it could not bear the first. Edmund Wandesford, only son of his Grace Godfrey Wandesford, Duke of Markby, and of her Grace Wilmot, Duchess of Markby, his lawful wife, born this 12th day of April, in the year of our Lord 1819, baptized this same day, by certificate of necessity, by the Reverend Tristram Ashfield, rector of Llanfihangel, in the county of Monmouth, the parents being absent and the child weakly. He read his son's name a third time, because he had not, in 3 years and 8 months, permitted himself to imagine that there might be one. He folded the parchment. He set it upon the unsigned deed. He set the unsigned deed upon the Beaumont evidence. He set his palm upon all 3. Then he rose. He walked to the window. He looked out at Grosvenor Square in the thin gray afternoon, at the iron railings tipped in gold, at the carriages passing, at the world that had, until this hour, been arranged exactly as he intended. Fenwick waited. He thought he knew what would come next. He thought his Grace would order the carriage. He thought his Grace would drive that same hour to the chandler's stairs in Marylebone, and climb them, and knock, and kneel, and weep, and beg. It was not what came next. The Duke turned from the window. His face had the precise composure it had worn at Waterloo when the French cuirassiers came over the hill. Fenwick, Your Grace. Tomorrow afternoon at 3, the Marquis of Bridges and his wife and his daughter are to wait upon me at the establishment of Sir Harrington Gerard in Bond Street. The betrothal ring, of the same stone and setting as the ring of 1818, has been prepared. The announcement is to follow at the rooms of Lady Bridges that same evening at 8:30. Yes, Your Grace. The appointment at Gerard's will be kept. Fenwick lifted his head sharply. Your Grace, it will be kept. Your Grace, the lady, the child. The lady has lived above a chandler in Marylebone for 3 years and 8 months, Fenwick. She will live there for a further 24 hours. The first thing I do for her cannot be the second thing of an afternoon. The first thing I do for her must be that which she has not asked of me, but which her father required of every man in England who loved his king. The first thing I do for her is the ruin of the man who killed her father, and I shall do it in the very room in which his daughter intends to place his stolen ring upon my finger, with the witnesses he himself has chosen, in the precise hour at which he has come to expect his triumph. He will walk into Garrett's a marquess and walk out a felon. The lady shall hear of it before sunset. The child shall hear of it as a child hears of weather. Do you understand? I understand, your grace. You will write tonight to the Lord Chancellor, requesting the favor of half an hour at 6 tomorrow evening. You will write to Mr. Justice Wedderburn, requesting the same. You will write to my bankers at Coutts, instructing them to purchase, before noon tomorrow, every bond, mortgage, and instrument of debt against the person and estates of Lord Maurice Wentworth, regardless of price. You will, lastly, write to Lady Honoria Quendon, Dowager Countess of Quendon, at her house in Berkeley Square, requesting that she call upon me here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, upon a matter touching the welfare of her goddaughter. You will deliver these notes yourself, by hand, tonight. Do you understand? Yes, your grace. Go. Fenwick went. He paused at the door, his hand upon the latch. Your grace. What is it? The lady's ring. The Duke turned. He drew from beneath his shirt a thin silver chain. From the chain hung a small signet ring of plain silver, very worn, engraved with the crowned stag of Markby. It was the mate of the ring that, at that same hour, lay against the heart of a copper-haired bonnet-maker in a cold room above a chandler's shop on the Marylebone Road. She kept hers, the Duke said. It would seem so, your grace. I kept mine. I am aware, your grace. You knew this also. 11 years, your grace, has taught me where your grace places his hand when he is thinking. The Duke did not smile, but something at the corner of the eye softened by a hair, and Fenwick saw it, and bowed deeply, and went out. When he was gone, the Duke sat down at the desk. He laid the silver chain upon the parchment that named his son. He set his elbows upon the desk and rested his face in his hands for the space of 3 breaths. Then he straightened, drew the inkstand toward him, took a clean sheet of paper, and began to write the first of 7 letters that would, between that night and the following midnight, dismantle Lord Maurice Wentworth, Marquess of Bridges, from the upper rank of the English peerage, and place him in the dock at the Old Bailey. He wrote without haste. Each letter was short. Each was sealed with the crowned stag, in black wax, by his own hand. The candles burned through, the clock on the chimney-piece struck 2, and then 3, and then 4, and the Duke wrote on, and at 5, Fenwick returned with the rein on his coat, and took the 7 letters away in a satchel, and went out into Grosvenor Square again, to deliver them himself before dawn. In Marylebone, the milliner's bell had not yet rung. Wilmot Beaumont woke in the dark, drew her shift over her head, fastened the silver ring at her throat without thinking, lit no candle, and dressed by feel. Edmund slept on. She watched him a moment in the grey light from the window. She thought, as she did most mornings, that she would write to Honoria today, that she would accept the offered shelter, that she would take her son out of the soot of Marylebone before the winter. She thought, as she did most mornings, that she would not write. She would do today as yesterday. The letter had been delivered. The duty was discharged. There was no more to do. She did not know that, at that same hour, 2 streets from where she stood, a footman in Markby livery was hammering at the door of the Dowager Countess of Quendon, with a sealed note in his hand, and instructions to wait for the answer. She did not know that in a counting-house in Lombard Street, a clerk was already drawing up the deed of purchase of the 3rd mortgage on Bridges Park. She did not know that, by the hour at which she fed Edmund his bread and milk on the curb, the trap that would close upon the house of Wentworth at 5 the following afternoon was already 3/4 built, and that the man who was building it had her silver ring against his heart, and her son's name folded inside his coat. She walked east through the dawn, with her child by the hand, and she did not look back, and she did not know that, for the first time in 3 years and 8 months, she was being watched. The watcher was a thin man in a brown coat who had not slept. Mr. Ambrose Fenwick stood in the recessed doorway of a tobacconist on the far side of Marylebone Lane, and counted, by the small movements of her shoulders, the number of times Wilmot Beaumont stopped to adjust the child's grip on her hand. 4 stops in 200 yards. The boy was tired. The mother was not yet aware that she was being followed, because she had spent 3 years and 8 months learning never to look behind her, only ahead, and the habit had become a kind of armor. Fenwick had received his instructions at 2:30 in the morning, in the Duke's private study, by the light of a single beeswax candle. The instructions had been 6 words long. Find her. Confirm the child. Quietly. He had begun with the bonnet shop in Marylebone. He had not asked the proprietress questions. He had bought a black ribbon for a niece who did not exist, and had let his eye travel over the order book lying open beside the till, and he had read the name Mrs. Beaumont, Crawford Street, 2 pence the trim, and that had been enough. Now he watched her turn the corner into Crawford Street, and he did not follow her to the door. He turned instead toward the parish church of St. Mary's, because parish registers in London told a man only what a child's parents had wished the world to believe, and Fenwick had served the Duke of Markby for 11 years, and in 11 years he had learned that the truth of a christening lived in the place where no one had thought to hide it. By 9 that morning he was on the post road to Monmouthshire. In a small upper room above the bonnet shop, Wilmot peeled the wet stockings from Edmund's feet and rubbed warmth back into them with the corner of her shawl. The boy did not complain. He never complained. He sat very still on the edge of the narrow bed and watched his mother's hands the way other children watched a conjurer at a fair, with the grave attention of one who suspected that the trick might at any moment fail. "You ate the bread," she said. "I ate the bread, Mamma. Then we are honest with the baker for one more day." She kissed the top of his head and felt, beneath her lips, the same fineness of bone she had once felt beneath her own palm at the back of his father's neck, in a room she no longer permitted herself to remember. She straightened. She set the kettle on the small grate. She did not allow the memory to advance any further than the bone. The letter had been delivered. The bargain with her aunt's ghost was kept. What remained was rent, and rent was 3 shillings on Saturday, and Saturday was the day after tomorrow, and she had 2 shillings and 4 pence in the tin box behind the loose brick, and Lady Honoria Quendon had offered shelter, and pride was a poor man's only blanket, but it was, she had found, surprisingly warm. She did not yet know that her name had been spoken aloud, twice, in a room at Markby House, by a man who had not spoken it in 3 years. The Duke of Markby had not slept either. He sat at the long mahogany table in the breakfast room, with an untouched cup of coffee cooling at his elbow, and the dossier from the sealed letter open before him. He had read every sheet of it 4 times. He had laid the 3 receipts in a precise row. He had set the 2 letters at right angles. He had placed the magistrate's certificate beneath them all, like the foundation of a small, exact building. The handwriting of Lord Maurice Wentworth, Marquis of Bridges, lay before him in 3 separate documents, and in each one it confessed forgery, subornation of a French agent, the deliberate ruin of Viscount Beaumont in the spring of 1813, the destruction of a man's name, his fortune, his health, his daughter's marriage prospects, the very ground beneath the feet of a girl of 13 who had stood that summer at her father's grave in a borrowed black dress. The Duke had married that girl 5 years later. He had been told, by his own solicitor, by his own steward, by his own mother before she died, that the Beaumont escutcheon was tainted past restoration, and that the union was a charity which no charity in the world could disguise. He had been told further, by an anonymous letter delivered to this very house on the morning after his wedding night, that his bride had taken her vows already carrying another man's child. He had believed the letter for the space of 1 breath. In that breath he had signed his name to the separation laid before him by Mr. Fenwick, and in the breath after that he had refused, for 3 years and 8 months, to take the question up again, because to take it up was to confess that he had ruined a girl of 18 on the strength of an unsigned page. He looked now at Lord Maurice's handwriting and understood, with the cold completeness of a man reading his own death certificate, that the anonymous letter had come from the same pen. He did not move for a long time. A coal shifted in the grate. The long case clock in the hall struck the half-hour. Somewhere above stairs, a maid dropped a brass scuttle and was hushed. The ordinary noises of the house continued around him as though the world had not been quietly rearranged at 3 in the morning. He rose at last and walked to the window and looked down into the square, where the lamplighters were extinguishing the last of the night's flames in the grey rain of a London dawn. He thought, not of Wilmot, but of Lord Maurice Wentworth's daughter, Lady Cassandra Wentworth, 19 years old, pale gold hair dressed à la grecque, painted patch at the corner of the mouth, bride-to-be of the Duke of Markby by the announcement printed in the Morning Post that very week. He thought of the ring that lay at this hour in a velvet tray at Garrard's on Bond Street, awaiting his pleasure at 5 o'clock, the square emerald cut, the diamonds, the Markby setting, the same ring, in design and in stone, that he had placed upon the finger of an 18-year-old girl in a country chapel in Monmouthshire in the spring of 1818. He turned from the window. "Bring me Fenwick the moment he returns," he said to the empty room, and the footman in the corridor, who had not been spoken to, bowed to no one and went. By noon, Fenwick was on the post road back to London. The certificate of baptism lay folded in oilskin in the inner pocket of his coat, against his ribs, and he could feel it as one feels the edge of a blade carried inside a sleeve. Reverend Tristram Ashfield of St. Cadoc's, Lanby-Hangle, had received him in a vestry that smelled of damp prayer books, and had unlocked the parish chest with the slow ceremony of a man who knew that the volume he was about to open might one day be subpoenaed. Edmund Wandesford, born the 23rd day of December, in the year of our Lord 1818, son of Godfrey Wandesford, Duke of Markby, and of Wilmot Wandesford, Duchess of Markby, his wife. Christened the 2nd day of February, 1819. Sponsors, Lady Honoria Quendon, and the Reverend Tristram Ashfield himself. The Reverend had written the entry in his own hand. He remembered the mother. He remembered her veil. He remembered that no one of the Markby household had been present, and that a small purse of gold had been left upon the font for the poor of the parish, and that the young woman had wept once, silently, at the words, his wife, and had then dried her face, and signed her name in a hand so steady that the ink had not smudged. Fenwick had thanked him. Fenwick had walked out into the churchyard and had stood for a full minute with his hand pressed against the lichened wall of the south transept, because in 11 years of service he had never once allowed himself the indulgence of grief, and he found that he was perilously close to it now. He had then mounted his horse and ridden, without stopping, the road back to London. He reached Markby House at 4:15 in the afternoon. He did not change his coat. He went directly to the study. He laid the oilskin upon the desk and unwrapped it, and stepped one pace back and waited. The Duke read the entry. He read it again. He read the name of his son twice, the second time in a voice so low that Fenwick, standing 2 yards away, did not hear the syllables, only the shape of them in the Duke's throat. A silence followed which Fenwick, who had measured many silences in this house, judged to be the longest he had ever measured. The Duke set the page down upon the desk and laid the flat of his hand across the name as though to keep it from the draught. How old? 3 years and 4 months, your grace. His health. I am told he is small for his age, otherwise sound. His mother. She lives above a bonnet shop in Crawford Street. She works the trim at 2 pence the yard. She uses her mother's maiden name. She has, by my best count, 2 shillings and 4 pence in a tin box behind a loose brick in the chimney breast. The Duke closed his eyes once. He opened them, and the Countess of Quendon has offered her shelter. Yesterday, your grace, in Hyde Park. The offer was declined. I believe it will be accepted before the day is out. Good. Fenwick had expected a different word. He waited. You will say nothing to her, the Duke said. Not a syllable. Not through the Countess, not through any servant, not through any agent of this house. She is to know nothing of what we know, and nothing of what we intend, until the matter is finished. Fenwick inclined his head. He had served the Duke long enough to understand that this was not cruelty, it was strategy. A woman who knew that her husband had at last opened his eyes was a woman who could be lifted, broken, made hostage. A woman who did not know was, for a single useful day, invisible. Your grace will not go to her. I will not go to her. Your grace will go to Gerard's. At 5 o'clock, as arranged, Fenwick's pale eyes lifted from the desk. He understood, then, what was being constructed in the room around him, the way a mason understands by the placement of one stone where the next 12 will fall. You mean to take Lord Maurice with you? He has been invited. He has accepted. He wishes, he tells me, to see the ring placed in the velvet before it is placed upon his daughter's finger. He wishes to be present at the moment of his family's elevation. He shall be present at the moment of his family's elevation. And the Marchioness will be at home making lists of the ladies who must be invited to a wedding which will not occur. Let her make them. They will be useful to her in 3 weeks' time, when she requires names of households who will still receive her, and finds the column short. Fenwick said nothing. Lady Cassandra will also be present at Gerard's, the Duke continued. She has insisted. I have not discouraged her. She wishes to see the stone before it touches her hand. She shall see the stone. She shall also see what the stone touches first. Your Grace. There is a window, Fenwick, on the east side of Gerard's premises, which gives upon Bond Street. From the counter where the trays are laid, one may see directly across the road to the pavement opposite. The Countess of Quendon's town carriage, by my understanding, is in Bond Street most afternoons between 5 and 6, taking the Countess to her milliner. It is, your Grace. The Countess will, this afternoon, find that she requires a particular shade of grosgrain, which can only be procured at the warehouse of Messrs. Hewlett, 2 doors south of Garrard's. She will take her goddaughter and her godson with her for the walk. She will be informed. She will be informed by a note in your hand, sealed with no crest, signed with the initial of an old friend whose name she will not quite recall, but will not dare disown. The note will reach her at 5 minutes past 4. She has half an hour to dress the child. Yes, Your Grace. Lord Maurice will arrive at Garrard's at 10 minutes to 5. I will arrive at 5. The ring will be brought from the safe at 5 minutes past. I will take it in my hand at 10 past. At a quarter past 5 I shall be standing at the counter with the ring between my fingers, and Lord Maurice will be standing at my left, and his daughter will be standing at my right, and Sir Harrington Garrard will be standing behind the counter, and the window will be at my back, and Mrs. Beaumont will be on the pavement opposite with the Marquis of Risley by the hand. Fenwick's lips parted once and closed again. The Duke had spoken the boy's true title without inflection, as though it had been his title from the cradle, which in law and in the eyes of the Church it had. And then, Your Grace, then I shall turn from the counter, Fenwick, and I shall cross Bond Street, and I shall say to my wife what I should have said 3 years and 8 months ago. And Lord Maurice will follow me because he will not yet understand what has happened, and his daughter will follow him because she will believe that she is about to witness an act of insult committed against a tradeswoman by her future husband, and Sir Harrington Garrard will follow them all, because Sir Harrington Garrard knows, as I know, as you know, that the stone in his hand is the second cut of the same emerald that he set into a ring for me in the spring of 1818. Fenwick lowered his head a fraction. The first cut, Your Grace, hangs at this hour on a silver cord around the neck of the Duchess of Markby. Just so. A coal collapsed in the grate. The long case clock in the hall struck 3/4 past 4. Your Grace will not strike him in the street. I will not strike him in the street. The street is for the eye only. The blow falls tonight, at the Devonshire ball, before 200 witnesses and the Lord Chancellor of England. Then I am to deliver the dossier to his Lordship the Lord Chancellor, at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock precisely. He dines at his townhouse. He will receive a sealed packet from a gentleman in a brown coat with no card. He will open it. He will read it. He will arrive at Devonshire House at 9:30, an hour earlier than his usual habit, because a man who has read what he is about to read cannot keep his appetite for soup. And the debts of Lord Maurice are to be purchased through 3 separate intermediaries between this hour and Monday noon. The notes are at this hour in the hands of 4 moneylenders, 2 wine merchants, a tailor in St. James's, and a gentleman in the city, whose name even Lord Maurice has been careful not to learn. I want every paper in this house by Monday at 12. On Monday at 1 the bailiffs go to Bridges' house. And the engagement is void from the moment my foot leaves the pavement of Garrard's, because I have never been single, Fenwick. I have only been mistaken. The mistake is mine. The correction will be public. And the lady? Which lady? Lady Cassandra Wentworth, Your Grace. The Duke considered the polished surface of his desk for the space of 3 breaths. Lady Cassandra Wentworth, he said at last, is 19 years old, and has been raised by her father to believe that her face is a fortune, and her name is a key. She will discover this evening that the face has been spent and the key has been changed in the lock. I do not propose to crush her further than that. The crushing of Lady Cassandra is not my work. It is her father's, and it was done before I ever entered the room. What I shall require of her, before the night is out, is one small act of speech in a public place, on her knees, on a parquet floor. After that, what remains of her is for her family to bury or to save. Yes, Your Grace. You disapprove. I do not, Your Grace. You hesitate. I am tired, Your Grace. I have ridden through the night and through the day. I find that I do not yet know how to address the Duchess when next I am admitted to her presence, and I am ashamed of the ignorance. The Duke looked at him then, properly, for perhaps the first time in 11 years of service. You will address her, Fenwick, as Your Grace, as you should have addressed her on the morning of the 7th of June, 1818, when she stood in the corridor outside this study, and was turned away by a footman acting on the instructions of a fool. The fool was not you. The fool was not you either, Your Grace. The fool was the man who wrote the unsigned letter. The fool was the man who believed it. I shall not forgive him this side of the grave. But the grave is some way off, and there is work to be done before I reach it. Go, dress, eat. Be at the door of the Lord Chancellor's house at 6 o'clock with the packet in your hand. Do not return here until I send for you. Your Grace. Fenwick bowed and went. The Duke remained at the desk for several minutes longer, the certificate of baptism beneath his hand. He did not lift his hand. He felt, beneath the parchment, the faint indentation of the words Edmund Wandesford and the slighter indentation, in the same line, of the word legitimate, written by a country parson in a vestry in Monmouthshire, who had wept once at a christening and never spoken of it after. The Duke had not wept at his son's birth. He had not known of it. He had been at this same desk on the night of the 23rd of December, 1818, signing leases for a mine in Cornwall, and his coffee had grown cold at his elbow, and a maid had come in to mend the fire, and he had not looked up. He had been 3 counties away from the cry of his only living child, and the distance had been entirely of his own making. He rose. He walked to the corner of the study where the long pier glass stood. He looked into it. He saw a man of 33 in a coat cut last month in Savile Row, a cravat tied that morning by a valet who had asked no questions, a face which the newspapers were pleased to call the Ice Duke, and which his late mother had been pleased to call composed, and he saw, for the first time in his adult life, what an old French abbess at the convent school of his boyhood had once told him she saw in his face when he refused to weep at his father's funeral. She had told him, in her soft regional French, that there was a kind of man who could not weep because he had decided, very young, that to weep was to admit that there was someone in the world who could be lost. The boy of 8 had not understood her. The Duke of 33 did. He turned from the glass. He rang the bell. His valet came. The black coat, the grey waistcoat, the Hessian boots, the signet on the left. At once, Your Grace. And lay out the dress sword for 9 o'clock. The dress sword, Your Grace. For the Devonshire ball. At once, Your Grace. The valet did not look at him. The valet had served the Duke for 9 years and had never once heard the dress sword called for at a ball. At 20 minutes to 5, the Duke of Markby descended the steps of Markby House into a clear London afternoon, in which the rain had at last lifted, and a brittle yellow sun lay along the parapets of Mayfair. His carriage waited. He did not take it. He gave instructions that it should follow at a distance of 50 paces. He walked. He walked east along Grosvenor Street, and turned south into New Bond Street, and felt, for the first time in 3 years and 8 months, the small, exact pleasure of moving with the grain of his own intention rather than against it. He passed the windows of milliners and glovers and print sellers. He inclined his head to 2 dowagers who curtsied so deeply that one of them lost her balance and was caught by the other. He did not stop. He walked at the pace of a man who has measured the distance between 2 doors and knows precisely how long it will take him to cross it. At Garrard's he found Lord Maurice Wentworth already on the step, in a coat of blue superfine cut, to disguise the slight stoop of a man whose liver had been 40 for a long time, and a cravat tied that morning by a valet who had not been paid since Michaelmas. Lord Maurice's face was already pink with the second brandy of the afternoon, and the unfamiliar exertion of waiting for a duke instead of being kept waiting by one. Markby, Bridges, my daughter is within, so I observe. She is delighted, as she should be. Lord Maurice laughed too loudly at nothing and held the door, and the Duke of Markby stepped past him into the warm, gaslit interior of Garrard's & Co., jewelers to the crown, where Sir Harrington Garrard was already bowing behind the long counter with the velvet tray laid before him, and where Lady Cassandra Wentworth stood with her gloved hand resting upon the back of a small gilt chair, her lips parted in a smile of practised triumph, and where the east window gave directly upon the pavement of Bond Street, and where, in the distance, the small black carriage of the Dowager Countess of Quendon was at that very moment rounding the corner from Conduit Street, with a woman in dust-grey wool and a child in a brown coat seated within. The Duke did not look at the window. He approached the counter. He laid his gloves beside the tray. He inclined his head to Sir Harrington Garrard, who inclined his head in return, and who lifted the velvet and turned it so that the square emerald caught the gaslight and threw a small green flame into the air between them. Your Grace, Sir Harrington, the stone, Your Grace, the stone. Lady Cassandra moved a half-pace forward. Lord Maurice exhaled. Outside, on the pavement opposite, the carriage door of the Dowager Countess of Quendon opened, and a small gloved hand emerged, and was followed by a larger one, and Wilmot Beaumont stepped down into Bond Street with her son by the hand, and she looked, as she always looked when descending into any street in London, directly ahead of her, and never to the side. The Duke, behind the counter, did not turn his head. He felt the weight of the emerald in the cup of his palm. He felt, far more distinctly, the weight of 3 years and 8 months of an unsigned letter pressing upon his right hand from the inside of his own coat pocket. He raised the ring. He held it in the light. He spoke to no one in particular, and to everyone in the shop, and to the woman across the street who could not yet hear him. "Sir Harrington, be so good as to tell me, is this the same stone?" Sir Harrington Gerard's silver side whiskers trembled once. "Your Grace, is this the same emerald, Sir Harrington, that you cut in two in the spring of 1818, half for the betrothal ring of the Duchess of Markby, half held in your vault against the day? You were good enough to tell me at the time, when the Duke of Markby should require it for some second great occasion in his life." Sir Harrington closed his eyes for the space of one breath. He opened them. "It is, Your Grace. It is the same stone, from the same rough, cut by the same hand. I would know it among 10,000. Lord Maurice Wentworth, behind the Duke, made a small dry sound in his throat, which was not quite a word. Lady Cassandra Wentworth's smile did not yet falter, because she had not yet understood, and would not understand for perhaps another 12 seconds, that the ring in the Duke's fingers had a sister, and that the sister was at this moment on a silver cord around the neck of a woman in dust-gray wool, standing on the pavement directly across the street from the window at the Duke's back. The Duke laid the ring, very gently, back into the velvet. He turned to Lord Maurice Wentworth. "You will accompany me, my lord. Across the road now. Markby." "What in God's now, my lord?" He walked to the door. Lord Maurice, after a single uncertain glance at his daughter, followed him. Lady Cassandra, after a single uncertain glance at her father, followed them both. Sir Harrington Gerard, with the velvet tray still in his hand, came round the end of the counter and followed at the proper distance of a tradesman who has been summoned to witness. The bell above the door rang once. Bond Street lay before them in the brittle yellow sun. Carriages passed. A flower girl on the corner cried her violets. The Duke of Markby stepped down onto the cobbles and crossed the road at the walk of a man who was no longer in any hurry whatsoever, because he had at last understood that there was nothing in the world worth being late for, except the face of a woman in dust-gray wool, with a child by the hand. And she was, as he had arranged, exactly 7 paces away. She turned. She saw him. Her face did not change. Edmund, beside her, looked up at the tall stranger in the black coat with the cane of ebony and the signet of the Servus Coronatus upon the left little finger, and tilted his head the precise quarter-inch by which his father, at the age of 3, had been used to tilt his when puzzled. And the Duke of Markby, who had not wept at his father's funeral, nor at his mother's, felt the inside of his chest become, for one instant, entirely empty, and then entirely full. He stopped 1 yard from her. He did not yet kneel. He would kneel at 10 o'clock that night, before 200 witnesses, on the parquet of Devonshire House. Here, in Bond Street, in the yellow afternoon, he only inclined his head, very slightly, in the bow which a duke gives to a duchess, and which he had not given to this duchess in 3 years and 8 months, and which Lord Maurice Wentworth, 2 paces behind him, saw and understood at last, and understood also that he had been brought across the road, not to witness a triumph, but to witness his own annihilation, and that the annihilation had already, quietly, irrevocably, begun. The annexo behind Quendon House was a low-ceilinged set of 3 rooms that had once belonged to a French governess long since pensioned off, and Honoria had ordered fresh linen, a fire, and a tray of bread and clear broth before her own boots were even dry. Wilmot stood in the middle of the smallest room, with Edmund pressed against her thigh, and for a long moment she did nothing at all. She did not weep. She did not sit. She placed the sealed letter she still carried, the one whose copy had already crossed Bond Street and entered Markby House through a servant's door, flat upon the writing table, smoothed it twice with her palm, and only then knelt to unbutton Edmund's little wool coat. "You are tired, my dove," she said. "I am not tired," Edmund said. He was tired. The Carnerino de Pano hung from his fist by one ear. Honoria appeared in the doorway with her lorgnau raised, took one survey of the room, and pronounced it inadequate. Within the hour 2 extra candles had arrived, a porcelain basin, a wooden horse painted red, and a maid named Susan who curtsied so deeply to Edmund that the boy laughed for the first time in 3 days. That night Wilmot did not sleep. She sat by the small fire in her grey wool gown, with the bonnet at last unpinned. the red hair coiling loose against the pale skin of her neck, and she watched her son breathe in the curtained bed. She had been a duchess once for 6 weeks, a wife in name for 6 weeks more, and a seamstress for 3 years and 4 months, and tonight, in this borrowed room, she did not yet know which of the 3 women she was. Honoria came in without knocking, set down a glass of warm milk, and took the chair opposite without speaking. After a while, the old woman said, "He has the very same dimple." "I know. On the right cheek only." "I know, Honoria. And the gray of the eye is the gray of the sword, not the gray of the sky." Wilmot turned her face into the firelight. "Do you mean to advise me, godmother?" "I mean to tell you that the boy is safe here for as long as the rooms stand. I mean to tell you that I have already written to my solicitor in Lincoln's Inn that any person, however highly titled, who tries to remove either of you from this house without your written consent will discover that a dowager countess of 64 has more friends in the Court of Chancery than a duke of 33. That is what I mean to tell you." Wilmot looked at her for a long moment. Then she rose, crossed the small distance between the 2 chairs, and kissed the older woman on the forehead, just below the powder line. "Good," Honoria said briskly. "Now drink the milk." Wilmot drank the milk. She still did not sleep. In the great house across the park, the Duke of Markby was not sleeping either. He sat in his library in shirt sleeves with the certificate of baptism open before him and a single candle burning low, and Fenwick, who had not been sent home, sat opposite with the second copy in his lap and a pen between his fingers, drafting in silence the letters that would go out at first light. To the Lord Chancellor, to the Archbishop's secretary, to the magistrate at Bow Street, to the banker who held 3 of the larger notes upon Lord Maurice Wentworth's estate. The Duke wrote none of them himself. He sat very still and watched the candle. At one point he said, "Fenwick, your grace." "Where is she lodged?" "At Quendon House, your grace, in the rear annex. Lady Honoria received her at 4 this afternoon." "Good. Your grace? Do not call upon her tonight. Do not send. The first word she has from this house tomorrow will be in public, or it will be nothing." Fenwick inclined his long head. He understood. The Ice Duke would not be seen creeping to a back door in the dark to beg what the law and the church had never taken from him. He would walk to her at the hour and in the place where every eye in London could see him do it, or he would not walk at all. Justice first, mercy as its consequence. It was the only way a man of his name could begin to undo 3 years and a half. Fenwick wrote on. Outside, the first of the night watchmen called the hour, and a thin rain began to fall against the panes. Friday dawned gray and clear. By 8 in the morning, Wilmot was already at the small writing table with a needle in her hand, repairing the torn ear of the Carnadino de Pano, while Edmund ate buttered bread at her elbow. She had refused breakfast in bed. She had refused a borrowed gown. She wore the same wool the color of Paris dust, brushed and steamed by Susan until the worst of the road was gone from it, and she had pinned her red hair in the same low knot she had worn for 3 years to the chapelaria. "Mamma," Edmund said, "my dove, are we still poor?" She put down the needle. "We are still careful, Edmund. There is a difference." He considered this, frowning, and then nodded as if the distinction satisfied him entirely, and returned to his bread. It was at 10:30 that the trouble entered the garden. Susan came up the stair 2 steps at a time, breathless, with her cap askew. "Madam," 3 ladies at the front, with a footman, the Lady Cassandra Wentworth, and 2 companions. "They say they have come on a visit of charity, ma'am, to see the orphan child Lady Quendon has taken in." Wilmot's needle did not move. She set it down very carefully upon the cloth, smoothed the cloth with her palm, and stood. "Where is Lady Quendon?" "Out, ma'am. Gone to Hatchard's. Not back until 12. "And they know it?" "They—" "Yes, ma'am, I believe they do," the footman asked particularly. "Of course." Wilmot bent and took Edmund's small hand. "Show them into the back parlor, Susan. Not the garden, the parlor. I shall come down." "Yes, ma'am." "Susan." "Ma'am, do not leave the room while they are in it. Stand by the door. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not leave." Susan, who was 19 and from Norfolk and not stupid, curtsied and went. Wilmot looked at her own reflection in the small glass above the basin for the space of one slow breath. The gray wool, the pale face, the freckles across the bridge of the nose, the red hair under the plain knot. She did not pinch her cheeks. She did not loosen the collar. She knelt to Edmund. "You will come downstairs with me, my dove. You will hold my hand. You will not speak unless I speak to you. If a lady asks your name, you will say Edmund. Only Edmund. Can you do that? Only Edmund, he repeated. Good boy. She rose, took the small hand in hers and went down. Lady Cassandra Wentworth stood in the center of the back parlor in white muslin, with rose-colored ribbons at the high waist, the bonnet still upon her bright fair head, the plumes very nearly brushing the low ceiling. Behind her, two girls of her own age in similar muslin had arranged themselves against the wallpaper like an audience that had paid for the seats. The footman waited in the passage. Susan took up her post inside the door and folded her hands. Cassandra's pale blue eyes went first to Wilmot's hair, then to Wilmot's face, then to Edmund, then, briefly, very briefly, to Edmund's right cheek, where the small dimple appeared as the child looked up at the unfamiliar lady and tried, out of pure 3-year-old politeness, to smile. Cassandra's mouth tightened, prettily, at the corner, where the painted patch sat. You are the seamstress. I am Mrs. Beaumont, Mrs. As I said. The two girls by the wall exchanged the smallest look. One of them touched the other's wrist with a gloved finger. Cassandra crossed the parlor in 3 small, measured steps, until she stood within arm's reach of the child. She bent forward from the waist, the great white plume of her bonnet nodding, and addressed Edmund directly. And what is your name, little man? Edmund. Edmund what? Only Edmund. How very modest. She straightened. The blue eyes returned to Wilmot. What a singular child. So well-spoken. Such curious coloring. The hair so very dark, and the eye so very pale. One might almost say, striking. He is 3, Wilmot said. And his father? Is no concern of yours, my lady. A silence. It was not a long silence. It lasted perhaps the length of 3 slow beats of the small ormolu clock upon the mantel. But in that silence, the two girls by the wall did not breathe, Susan by the door did not move, and Lady Cassandra Wentworth understood, with the swift accuracy of a clever woman whose entire fortune rested upon a single engagement, exactly what she was looking at. She understood the dimple, she understood the eye, she understood the unbroken composure of the woman in gray wool who had not curtsied, had not flinched, had not reached for the bell. She understood, above all, that she had perhaps 4 hours. She smiled. Forgive me, Mrs. Beaumont. I have been impertinent. Charity makes one over-familiar. May we take a turn in the garden? The air in here is close. The garden, then. Wilmot did not let go of Edmund's hand. They went down the 3 stone steps into Honoria's small walled garden, where the last of the late roses still held against the autumn, and a stone bench sat beneath a leafless pear tree. The 2 companions drifted behind. Susan, faithful, followed at 4 paces. Cassandra walked to the rosebush. She put out one gloved finger and, very lightly, touched a petal. You have traveled, I think, Mrs. Beaumont, from the country. From Marylebone. Ah, with a great deal of luggage for so short a journey. With 1 valise. Indeed. My maid mentioned a trunk. There is no trunk. How strange. She was so certain. Cassandra turned. The blue eyes were perfectly clear. Perhaps we ought to look. I should be sorry to think that anything from this house had been mislaid during your stay. My lady? My godmother's silver hairbrush, Mrs. Beaumont. The one with the chased lid. It went from the small parlor yesterday afternoon, between the hours of 3 and 5, the very hours, I am told, of your arrival. She paused. She tilted her bright head. I make no accusation. I merely suggest that, for everyone's peace of mind, your bag be brought down. Susan, fetch the lady's valise. Susan did not move. Susan looked at Wilmot. Wilmot said very evenly, Bring it, Susan. Susan went. The valise was brought into the garden upon a low wicker chair. Cassandra herself, with the elegance of one who had never opened a piece of luggage in her life, unfastened the 2 leather straps. The lid fell back. Inside were Wilmot's 3 folded gowns of gray and brown wool, a small wooden box of needles and thread, a Bible bound in worn calf, a child's nightshirt, 2 pairs of cotton stockings darned at the heel, the sealed copy of the Beaumont aunt's testamentary letter, and a single folded handkerchief of plain linen with the initials W. P picked out in white silk. There was no silver hairbrush. There was no chased lid. There was nothing of Quendon House inside the bag at all. One of the companions by the wall let out the smallest sound. It might have been a cough. Cassandra did not move for a long moment. The pale eyes traveled from the valise to Wilmot's face to Edmund, who had taken a step closer to his mother and was watching Cassandra with the grave attention with which small children watch large dogs. How? Disappointing, Cassandra said. My lady, that a person of your evident origin should be so very careful as to leave no trace. One almost admires it. It is not admiration that you feel, my lady. The pretty mouth went very thin. You are insolent. I am tired. You are a kept woman, madam, and a thief, and the silver is hidden somewhere upon the grounds, and I shall have the constable here before the hour is out, and your bastard taken to the parish, and you yourself. She did not finish the sentence. She struck Wilmot across the face. It was not the slap of a girl in a temper. It was a deliberate blow, delivered from the shoulder, with the full weight of the small gloved hand, and it landed flat upon Wilmot's left cheek with a sound that carried clean across the walled garden and rang back from the brick. Edmund cried out. Susan, by the wicker chair, took a single involuntary step forward, and then forced herself, white-faced, to stop. The two companions had gone the color of their muslin. Wilmot did not stagger. She did not raise a hand to her face. She closed her eyes for the space of one breath. The print of the small palm rose slowly upon her white skin, 4 narrow fingers and a thumb, in a clean red brand from the cheekbone to the line of the jaw. She opened her eyes. They were perfectly steady. She knelt. She knelt not to Cassandra, but to Edmund, who was crying in the silent, open-mouthed way of small children who have just seen something they did not know existed in the world, and she took his face between her hands, and she said quietly, I am here, my dove. I am here. Look at me. The lady has made a mistake. The lady has made a great mistake. Hush, now, hush. He hushed against her shoulder. She stood, slowly, with the child upon her hip, though he was almost too big for it now. She turned her face, the unmarked side, deliberately, towards Cassandra. The marked side burned. She did not touch it, she said, very softly, so that the two companions had to lean a little forward to hear. You have made a mistake the size of your own name, my lady. Cassandra's hand was still raised. It came down very slowly. How dare you? I dare, said Wilmot, because I have nothing left to lose that you have not already tried to take, and because in 4 hours' time you will discover that what you have just struck is not a seamstress. The blue eyes flickered. For the first time, they flickered. What are you? Wilmot did not answer. She walked past Cassandra Wentworth across the small garden, past the 2 muslin girls who drew their skirts back as though something might rub off, past Susan, who was trembling at the wicker chair, and up the 3 stone steps into the house. She did not look back. The valise remained open upon the chair behind her, its modest contents exposed to the autumn light. The wool gowns, the darned stockings, the sealed letter, the linen handkerchief with the white WB. Cassandra Wentworth looked down at it for a long time. Then she said to her companions, in a voice that was not quite the voice she had brought into the garden, We shall go now. They went. Honoria returned from Hatchard's at 12 with a parcel of 3 new novels under her arm, was met in the hall by Susan still weeping, climbed the stairs at a speed her physician would have forbidden, and found Wilmot in the small parlor upstairs, sitting very straight in a wooden chair, with Edmund asleep across her knees, and the print of a hand still burning along the left side of her face. Honoria stopped in the doorway. She set the parcel of novels upon the side table without looking at it. Who? She said. The Lady Cassandra Wentworth. In my house. In your garden. For what reason? She suspects. Honoria stood very still. After a moment she crossed the room, took the sleeping child gently from Wilmot's lap into her own arms despite the protest of her 64-year-old back, and laid him along the small settee under a cashmere shawl. She tucked the shawl with the precision of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and outlived 3 sisters. Then she went to the bell-pull and rang it once, briskly. A footman appeared. James, send to Markby House. The note is to go into Mr. Fenwick's hand, and no other. The words are these. The girl Wentworth came to Quendon House at 10:30 and struck her grace across the face in the presence of 3 witnesses. The child saw. Honoria Q. Repeat it. The footman repeated it, twice, until she was satisfied. Go. Run. He went. Honoria turned back to Wilmot. My dear, do not. Honoria. My very dear, please. The old woman knelt, with difficulty, beside the chair. She took one of Wilmot's hands between her own dry, small hands and held it without speaking. The fire crackled. Edmund breathed upon the settee. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the quarter. After a long while Wilmot said, in a voice that was almost ordinary, she knew. Yes. She knew within the first minute. She looked at his cheek, and she knew. Yes. And she decided in that minute that she had 4 hours to break me before the ring was put upon her finger at 5. Yes, my dear, that is what she decided. She is very quick. She is very afraid. Wilmot considered this. She turned the unburnt side of her face towards the fire and looked at the small flames for a long moment. Honoria, yes, I shall not hide. No, I shall not run to Wales tonight. I shall not take Edmund into the country. I shall not allow her, or her father, or any creature of their making, to send me out of this city by the back of a cart at dawn. No, my dear, you shall not, and I shall not weep. No, I have wept for 3 years and a half. I have not the salt left. Honoria's small black eyes glittered, but she said nothing, only pressed the cold thin hand once, briefly, between her own. Wilmot drew a slow breath. What hour is it? 12:15. Then, in 4 hours and 3/4, the Duke of Markby will set a green stone in gold upon the finger of the girl who struck me. He will not. Wilmot turned her head. You know something. I know that Mr. Fenwick was at his desk all night, and that a certain solicitor of Lincoln's Inn was woken at 6 this morning, and that the Lord Chancellor's secretary received a sealed packet at 9, and that there is a meeting at White's at 1 which will not go well for Lord Maurice Wentworth, and that the Gerard ring will not be placed upon any finger this afternoon. How can you know all this? Because, my dear, I have been a friend of this city for 40 years, and a wise friend keeps her ears at every door. Now she rose, stiffly. We shall put a cold cloth upon that cheek. We shall feed the child. We shall send for Madame Lestrange in Old Bond Street, who owes me a favor from 1814, and we shall have a gown ready by 8. Because tonight, my dear, you are going to a ball. Wilmot looked at her. Honoria. Yes. I cannot, you can, and you will. Because if you do not stand upright in green silk under the chandeliers of Devonshire House tonight, beside the man whose name you have carried in secret for 4 years, then the girl who struck you in my garden will have won, and I will not have it, Wilmot. I will not have it. The use of her name, her own name, not the false one she had worn for 3 years and a half, struck Wilmot harder than the hand of Cassandra Wentworth had struck her. She did not weep, but her chin trembled, for the first time since she had unpinned her bonnet the night before, and Honoria saw it, and did not look away, and did not comment. Madame Lestrange, Honoria said again, briskly, ringing the bell. By 1 o'clock. The green silk, the Markby tiara, is in my strong box upstairs since 1818, when your husband sent it to me for safekeeping, the night before he signed the papers he should never have signed. He never asked for it back. It has waited 4 years. It will wait 6 hours more. Wilmot stared at her. The Markby tiara is in this house. It has been in this house since the 7th of November, 1818, together with the necklace and the earrings, and a sealed letter from your husband to me, which I have never read because the seal was never broken. I shall break it this afternoon. I think the time has come. She walked, very upright for a woman of her age, to the door. There she paused, with her hand upon the frame. My dear, Honoria, he did not stop loving you. He stopped permitting himself to think of you. There is a difference. She went out, and closed the door very softly behind her. Wilmot sat for a long moment in the wooden chair with the burning cheek and the sleeping child and the small fire, and she did not move. The print of Cassandra's hand was already darkening to a bruise along the line of her jaw. She raised her own hand, at last, and touched the place with the tips of 2 fingers, lightly, as one touches a wound to learn its shape. She did not weep. She rose. She went to the small writing table where she had laid the sealed copy of the Beaumont letter the night before. She took up a pen. She drew a fresh sheet of paper towards her. She dipped the pen. She wrote, in the small, fine, perfectly composed hand of a woman who had addressed 3,000 bonnets in 3 years and a half, to His Grace the Duke of Markby. She paused. The nib hovered above the paper. Then she wrote, very slowly, I shall be at Devonshire House at 10 this evening, in green. If your word to me this afternoon was your word, do not be late. She did not sign it. She folded the paper once. She sealed it with a plain wafer. She rang the bell. When Susan came, red-eyed but steady, Wilmot handed her the folded paper without rising from the chair. To Markby House. Into Mr. Fenwick's hand. Wait for no answer. Yes, ma'am. Susan. Ma'am? Thank you for not leaving the parlor. The girl's mouth trembled. She managed a small curtsy and went. Wilmot remained in the chair. Outside, beyond the walled garden, The bells of St. George's rang the 12:30, thin and clear in the autumn air, and somewhere in Bond Street, Sir Harrington Garrard was setting out upon the black velvet of his counter a single square emerald in a circle of small diamonds, polishing the gold with a square of chamois, and thinking that it was perhaps the most beautiful ring of the season, and wondering vaguely why the stone seemed so very familiar to his old eyes, as though he had set it once before, a long time ago, into a different gold, for a different bride, in another century altogether. He would remember within the hour. But not yet. Not yet. In Honoria's small upstairs parlor, Wilmot Beaumont, who had been a duchess for 6 weeks and a seamstress for 3 years and 4 months, and who was now neither and both, sat in a wooden chair beside a sleeping child, with the print of an open hand burning along the left side of her face, and waited, without weeping, for the city to come to her. The city did come to her, though not in the shape she had braced for. It came first as a thin gray rain against the parlor window, then as the rattle of a closed carriage drawing up in the mews below, and finally, as Lady Honoria Quendon herself, climbing the narrow back stairs with a tread that, for a woman of 64 and considerable circumference, was remarkably light. She paused in the doorway. She looked at the hand-shaped mark on Wilmot's cheek, and at Edmund curled small beneath the wool shawl, and at the unbroken straightness of Wilmot's back. "My dear," Honoria said quietly, "the Duke of Markby has just walked out of Garrard's, without a betrothal ring upon any finger but his own. Bond Street is already whispering. By tea-time it will be roaring." Wilmot did not turn her head. "He bought no ring?" He set the ring down upon the velvet, child, and crossed the road in the rain. "To whom?" "To you." Now Wilmot looked up. The print of the slap still lay along her cheekbone, like a poppy pressed into porcelain. "He was here?" "He stood on the curb a moment, looking at his son, and then he sent his card up by my footman. He waits, even now, in the green drawing-room downstairs. He has Mr. Fenwick with him, and a leather case, and no further appointments for the rest of his life, by the look of his face." Honoria allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "I told him he might wait. And Lady Cassandra? Sitting in her father's carriage at the Garrard's curb, my dear, with a Bridges anger upon her, and no ring upon her finger, and presently very few friends left in this town." Honoria came forward and laid her plump, beringed hand over Wilmot's cold one. "He has asked for the hour of the Devonshire ball. I have answered for you that you will appear. I had not the heart to refuse him in your name without first asking yours. You answered well. My carriage is ordered for 9. The emerald silk is laid out in the blue chamber. There is, in the long box upon the bed, a thing I have kept for you these 11 years, since your mother sent it to me in trust the week before she died. You will know it when you see it. I have polished it myself." Wilmot closed her eyes a moment. Then she rose. The shawl slipped from her shoulders and she did not catch it. Honoria caught it for her. "Tell his grace," Wilmot said, "that the Duchess of Markby will receive him for 1/4 of an hour, in this parlor, now. Not downstairs? He repudiated me in a study. He may begin to undo it in a parlor." Honoria withdrew. Wilmot crossed to the small oval glass above the chimney and looked, for the first time in 3 years and 4 months, with full attention at her own face. The mark was already darkening. The hair at her temples had escaped its pins. The gray wool dress was clean but mended at the cuff. She did not touch any of it. She turned back to the chair, sat, took Edmund's small hand into her own where it lay limp in sleep, and waited. He came in alone. He had removed neither his greatcoat nor his gloves before mounting the stairs, as though the time had been calculated to the half-minute, and a half-minute could not be spared for the hall. He stopped 2 paces inside the door. He looked at the child first, as a man looks at a thing he has been told exists but has not yet permitted himself to believe. Then he looked, properly, at her. The cicatrice at the corner of his jaw was very white. "Madam," he said. "Your Grace, I have brought Mr. Fenwick. He is downstairs. I have brought also the carriage and 4, and an empty house in Grosvenor Square that has been kept aired for 3 years and 4 months, upon a habit I could not name to myself until this afternoon." He paused. "I have not brought any words I prepared upon the road. None of them survived the staircase. Then speak without them." He drew off one glove, slowly, finger by finger, and held it in his hand, as if uncertain what to do with it. "In 1818 I signed a paper I had not read with attention, upon evidence I did not interrogate. In a temper I mistook for judgment. I was told a thing about you, and I believed it, because the man who told it stood to gain by my believing, and because believing it cost me nothing I yet understood the price of. I have been a duke 14 years and a fool 4. The fool went into Gerard's this afternoon. I do not know yet what came out. Did you read the Carta? I read it twice in the night and a third time at dawn. I have had Mr. Fenwick verify each name within it against the parish books and the regimental lists. Lord Maurice Wentworth forged the Beaumont scandal of 1813 to clear a debt of £12,000 owed to your father. He engaged a Frenchman named Cossart, who has since been hanged at Vincennes for an unrelated treason. He obtained 2 magistrates' signatures by means I shall lay before the Lord Chancellor at 6 o'clock this evening, an hour before the Devonshire ball opens its doors. He drew breath. Your father was innocent. Your name was clean before it was mine. It is clean now. I know it was clean. I have known it 11 years. Yes, I am the one who has only known it 11 hours. He looked at the child again. What is his name? Edmund Godfrey Wandesford. The Duke of Markby, who had stood at Waterloo without flinching when a sabre took the corner of his jaw, set his gloved hand upon the back of the nearest chair and held it. Godfrey, he repeated, almost without sound. After his father, in the hope, when he was born, that the name would one day be permitted to him. He is 3 and 4 months, his birthday, the 14th of April. He counted, visibly, behind his eyes, the months between a wedding night in February of 1818 and the 14th of April of 1819, and found the arithmetic obedient. And Mr. Fenwick has the certificate. He has had it since Wednesday last. He kept it from me 4 days. He kept it from you 4 days, because, had you known on Wednesday, you would have gone to Bond Street on Thursday with a pistol instead of with a solicitor, and Lord Maurice would have died a martyr instead of a forger. Mr. Fenwick reasoned, I think, that the boy deserved a father with no blood upon his hands. He will tell you so himself if you ask him. I shall not ask him. I shall thank him. A small silence. Edmund stirred. He turned his head against the chair, and the covina showed in his right cheek, soft, untroubled. The Duke did not move toward him. He understood, without instruction, that he had not yet earned the crossing of 3 feet of carpet. Madam, he said, I do not ask you to forgive me this afternoon. I ask one thing only, and then a second. The first is the right to undo, in public and in writing, before the Lord Chancellor at 6 and before all London at 10, every word that was set down against you and against your father. The second is the right to be present, hereafter, in whatever measure you permit, in the life of my son. And the third? There is no third I have the standing to ask. There is. Ask it. He looked at her. His gray eyes, which had been called cold for 14 years by men who had only ever seen them at a council table, were not cold. I should like, one day, when you can bear it, to be permitted to court my own wife. Wilmot did not answer at once. She bent her head and laid her cheek for one heartbeat against Edmund's small, dark hair. When she lifted her face, the mark of the slap was still there, but something behind it had altered. You may make your first 2 requests in the Devonshire ballroom tonight, Godfrey. The third you may begin upon at any hour after midnight, and you will find me a patient woman, but not a soft one. I have been 3 years and 4 months learning to live without a husband. I shall not learn in a single evening to live with one. I ask for years, madam, not for an evening. Then we are agreed upon the unit of measure. He bowed. It was not the bow of a duke to a petitioner. It was the bow of a man to a woman whose forgiveness has not yet been granted, and whose presence is, for that reason, the more terrible. He went out. She heard, downstairs, the murmur of his voice to Fenwick, low and steady, and the closing of the front door, and the carriage drawing away into the rain. Then she rose, lifted her sleeping son into her arms, and carried him through to the blue chamber to see what Honoria had laid out upon the bed. The dress was not the dress she had imagined. She had imagined, when Honoria spoke of emerald silk, something seemly and modest. The color deepened to discretion. Spread upon the counterpane was a gown of emerald so dark and so true that the folds of it caught the rainy afternoon light and turned green-black, like the deep of a forest pool in summer. The bodice was sewn over in silver thread in a pattern of laurel leaves, fine as frost. The sleeves were short and gently puffed, the neckline square and unhurried, the train just long enough to require a hand at the door. Beside it lay long white kid gloves to above the elbow, an ivory fan, satin slippers dyed to match the silk, and a domino mask of forest green velvet, with 3 peacock plumes laid against its temple. And in the long flat box at the head of the bed lay the tiara. Wilmot lifted the lid and stood quite still. 6 emeralds, square-cut, set in old gold, each one the size of a thumbnail, encircled by small white diamonds and joined by a fillet of laurel wrought in pale gold. It was the Markby Perruque. She had last seen it in February of 1818, when an aged dresser had set it upon her head an hour before her wedding, and the Dowager Duchess, dying that spring, had whispered that no Duchess of Markby in 4 generations had worn it for a man who did not first deserve her. The matching necklace lay coiled beneath, the eardrops, twin pendants, beside. "I sent it back to him in the autumn of 1818, Wilmot said softly, when Honoria came in behind her. "You sent the case," Honoria said. "The jewels your mother had me keep. She did not trust the Markby vault while there was a Wentworth within a mile of it. She was wiser than any of us knew. My mother kept the Markby emeralds. For you, child, only ever for you." Wilmot set the lid back upon the box, slowly, as though closing the lid of something living. "Then I shall wear them tonight, in his house, in front of his peers, and let him see them upon the head he chose to repudiate." She turned. "Help me to dress, Madrinya. There is not, after all, very much time." It took 2 hours. The bath was hot and the water scented with rosemary. The maid Honoria had borrowed from her own household washed Wilmot's hair in rainwater warmed at the kitchen fire, and dried it before the parlor grate until it took back the cobra luster it had had at 18. They left it loose at the back, as a duchess might, and lifted only the front into a knot of curls that the tiara would settle upon. They laced the bodice. They fastened the long white gloves above the elbow. They hooked the green slippers. They laid the emeralds about the throat and at the ears. When at last Honoria set the tiara into place, the dresser stepped back and made the smallest sound in her throat, a sound somewhere between approval and reverence, and Wilmot looked into the long glass and saw a woman she had last seen on a February morning in 1818, only older now, only steadier. Edmund was bathed, dressed in his cleanest jacket, and given to the nursery maid Honoria had also borrowed. He would sleep in Honoria's own bedchamber while she was at the ball. He would wake, if he woke, to a face he had begun to trust. The carriage drew up at 9:30. The Duke had sent his own. It was the great black town carriage with the silver servo crest of Markby upon the doors. The lamps lit, the 4 matched bays steaming in the wet, 2 footmen in Markby livery standing at the step. Inside, in a smaller case, lay a domino of plain black velvet for Lady Honoria and a single white rose for Wilmot's gloved hand. There was no note. The case was answer enough. Devonshire House blazed. Every window from the cellars to the attics threw yellow light against the rain. Carriages choked Piccadilly. Link boys ran with smoking torches. The queue at the porte-cochere stretched back to the corner. The crest of Markby upon their doors moved them forward through it. By the time the Markby carriage drew up at the steps, the rain had thinned to a fine mist, and the great double doors stood open upon a hall lined with hothouse lilies and footmen in powdered wigs. Honoria descended first. She arranged the train of her own black silk. She lifted her chin in the manner of a woman who had outlived 3 monarchs and intended to outlive a 4th. She turned to give Wilmot her hand. Wilmot stepped down. She did not put on the mask. She held it loosely in her gloved fingers, plumes downward. Honoria looked at her, understood, and laid her own black domino along the velvet bench inside the carriage. "We shall enter unmasked. Then, it is no longer the night for masks, Madrinya." They climbed the marble stairs together. At the head of the staircase stood the Devonshire majordomo, a man of 60 in scarlet and silver, with a list in one hand and a voice trained in 2 wars. He saw the servo on the carriage. He saw the tiara on the woman. He saw Lady Quendon on her arm. For 1/2 second, his professional impassivity faltered. Then it locked, with the perfection of a fired bolt, into place. He had been instructed, half an hour earlier, by the Duke of Markby in person, exactly what to say. He drew breath. His Grace the Duke of Markby, and Her Grace the Duchess of Markby, accompanied by the Right Honourable the Dowager Countess of Quendon. The room of 700 people, which had been a single river of music and conversation a heartbeat before, went silent. The orchestra in the gallery, which had been at the 3rd bar of a quadrille, faltered, recovered, and laid the bows softly across the strings. The Duke crossed the ballroom from the far end. He had not been at the door to receive her. He had calculated, correctly, that to take her hand at the threshold would be to make her his property again upon the threshold. He let her enter, instead, upon Honoria's arm, in her own right, in his colors and his jewels and his name. Then, in his black evening coat and his white gloves and the Markby sinete heavy upon his left hand, he came down the long length of the parquet between the two halves of the parted crowd, and he stopped before her, and he made her, in the sight of all London, the formal bow of a duke to his consort. "Your Grace," he said. "Your Grace." He offered her his arm. She took it. In the half-minute that followed, while the orchestra hung silent and 700 faces turned, Wilmot saw, against the far wall, exactly the company she had expected. Lord Maurice Wentworth, in his black evening coat and his domino, was already the color of bad veal. Beside him, Lady Hortense in her lilac and silver gauze had one fan against her bosom and another, half raised, against her mouth. Lady Cassandra in her sedum rosa and her tiara of small diamonds had gone, beneath her paint, a flat and unbecoming white. None of the three knew yet that, at 6 o'clock that evening, in a small panelled chamber in Westminster, the Lord Chancellor of England had received from Mr. Ambrose Fenwick a sealed packet of 3 receipts, 2 letters, and the affidavit of a Welsh magistrate, and had read it through twice without speaking. None of the 3 knew either that Mr. Fenwick had spent the intervening hours upon the Strand, in the counting houses of 3 private banks, purchasing the entire body of Lord Maurice's debts at par. They were about to learn both things at once. The Duke of Markby raised his free hand. The Devonshire majordomo, who had stood waiting upon that hand, struck his staff once upon the parquet. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," said the Duke, in a voice pitched without effort to the back of the room, "I beg the indulgence of our hostess for the space of 3 minutes." The Duchess of Devonshire, watching from beside the orchestra, inclined her head a quarter inch. It was granted. "In 1813, said the Duke, "the late Viscount Beaumont, father of my wife, was tried in the court of public opinion upon a charge of seditious correspondence with a French agent. He was not tried in any other court, for the evidence was held to be too sensitive. He died in the autumn of that year, by his own hand, in a Welsh cottage, with the matter unresolved and his name unrestored. His daughter, then a child of 13, bore the consequence of that scandal for 5 years, until I had the honor, in February of 1818, to make her my wife." He paused. The room did not breathe. "In May of 1818, upon the receipt of further evidence whose source I did not then question, I was led to believe that my wife had been false to me. I signed a deed of separation. I did not sign it well. The deed itself, gentlemen, was never executed upon her side. She refused, with the dignity that has marked her every act since, to lend her hand to a lie. In the eyes of God, of the Church of England, and of the law of this realm, the lady upon my arm has been, without interruption, from that February morning to this December evening, the Duchess of Markby. The error has been mine, the injury has been hers, the restitution begins tonight." A sound went through the room like wind through reeds. "At 6 o'clock this evening," the Duke continued, his grey eyes finding Lord Maurice across the parquet without haste, "the Lord Chancellor received, from the hand of my solicitor, evidence, verified, sworn, and corroborated, that the entire body of accusation against the late Viscount Beaumont was a forgery. The forger was Lord Maurice Wentworth, Marquis of Bridges. The motive was £12,000 owed by him to Viscount Beaumont, which the death of Viscount Beaumont conveniently extinguished. The agent of the forgery, a Frenchman named Cossart, was hanged in 1820 at Vincennes upon a separate count, and left a written confession in the hands of a priest, which my solicitor has obtained. A bill of indictment for perjury, fraud, and conspiracy to defame will be laid before the Court of King's Bench at the opening of Hilary term." Lady Hortense made a sound that began as a word and ended as a small wet collapse. She did not, in the event, faint. She sat down upon the gilt chair behind her with the inelegance of a sack of meal, and her lilac and silver gauze rustled around her like the feathers of a bird shot in flight. "Furthermore," said the Duke, "as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, the debts of Lord Maurice Wentworth, in the sum, gentlemen, of £41,800, held in the books of Coutts, Hoare's, and Drummond's, have been purchased entire by my own bank, and will be presented for full settlement at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. He has the weekend, if he chooses, to consider his accommodations." The Marquis of Bridges did not move. His face had gone past red into something gray. His mouth opened twice and closed twice. No words came out. "Finally," said the Duke, "the announcement made in the Morning Post of Tuesday last, concerning a contract of marriage between this house and the House of Bridges, was without foundation in law, for the simple reason that I was, am, and remain a married man. I published the rescindment of that announcement, in this room, before these witnesses, at this hour." He turned his head, then, deliberately, and looked at Lady Cassandra. She had not moved either. The small diamonds in her hair winked. The fan in her gloved hand trembled once, twice, and stopped. "There remains," said the Duke, very quietly, in a voice that none the less carried the matter of a blow, a new silence, sharper than the last. "This morning, in the garden of Lady Quendon's house, a guest of that house, under the color of a charitable visit, struck Her Grace the Duchess of Markby across the face, in the presence of a child of 3 years. The mark of that blow, as you may all observe, is still visible upon Her Grace's cheek." He did not gesture. He did not need to. 700 pairs of eyes had already found the bruise. Were the offender a gentleman, I should call him out at dawn. The offender is not a gentleman. The offender is a young woman of 19. I am, therefore, obliged to seek redress in a form proper to her station and to her sex. He waited. Lady Cassandra Wentworth. Approach. Cassandra did not move. Beside her, her father, who had not yet recovered the use of his tongue, made a small jerking motion of his hand toward her, half pleading, half command. Lady Hortense, from her gilt chair, gasped out a single word that might have been her daughter's name. Cassandra took one step forward, and another, and a third, and the parquet between her and the Duke seemed to lengthen with every pace. She stopped 6 feet from him. "Madam," said the Duke, "you will kneel." Her chin came up. "I am the daughter of a marquess." "You are the daughter of a forger," said the Duke. "Kneel, or be conducted from this room and from every drawing-room in England, in this generation and the next, by the unanimous resolution of the 4 ladies of the patronesses of Almack's, who have done me the honor to attend this evening for precisely this purpose." From the gallery above, where 4 women in white gloves and minor tiaras stood at the rail, came the smallest collective inclination of 4 heads. Lady Jersey's fan moved once, slowly, and was still. Cassandra knelt. She did it badly, as a woman does who has never knelt for anything in her life. The sedum rosa pooled awkwardly about her, and one slipper turned beneath her foot. The tiara slid a quarter of an inch, and she did not raise her hand to correct it. "Aloud," said the Duke, "to Her Grace. In your own words, and you will not rise until Lady Quendon, who stood witness to the blow this morning, indicates that you may." Cassandra lifted her face. The blue-ice eyes had filled, but the tears did not fall. She had too much pride for that, even now. She looked at Wilmot. Wilmot, in her emerald silk and her Markby tiara and the print of Cassandra's own hand still warm along her cheek, looked back without satisfaction and without pity, only with the steady gaze of a woman who has been struck and has not struck back, and who is, in consequence, the larger figure in the room. "Your Grace," said Cassandra, and her voice, which had never in 19 years had to ask for anything, cracked upon the word. "I struck you this morning in Lady Quendon's garden, in the presence of your son. I had no right, I knew no truth. I beg your pardon, here, before these witnesses, and I shall beg it again, in writing, tomorrow." She stopped. Honoria, in her black silk, with her white powdered curls and her painted patch, let 3 full bars of silence pass. She allowed the parquet to be cold. She allowed the pink satin to crease. She allowed, in front of every patroness of Almack's and every dowager of Mayfair, the daughter of Bridges to remain upon her knees for the length of time required to instruct the rest of Cassandra's life. Then, with the smallest, most courteous of gestures, she raised her gloved hand. Cassandra rose. She did not curtsy. She had not been told to. She walked, in a straight line and without weeping, the length of the ballroom to the door, and she did not look at her father as she passed him, and her father did not look at her. Behind her, Lord Maurice was already being approached by 2 gentlemen of the household with the discreet, immovable courtesy with which English servants conduct ruined men toward the smaller doors. The Duke of Markby waited until they were gone. Then he turned to his wife, in the silent ballroom, in the sight of the 4 patronesses and the 700 witnesses, and the orchestra in the gallery, with its bows still suspended, and he did a thing that no Duke of Markby in 4 generations had been known to do in any public room. He knelt, not with the awkwardness of Cassandra, with the steady, deliberate descent of a soldier, going down upon one knee to receive a wound or a benediction. He removed his right glove. He set it aside upon the parquet. He took Wilmot's gloved hand in his bare one, and he looked up into her face, and he spoke quietly enough that only the nearest 20 heard him distinctly, and loudly enough that the rest understood every word from the shape of his mouth. Wilmot, I repudiated you in a study, upon a lie, when you were 18 and carrying my son. I have not earned the right to ask you back. I ask, instead, the right to spend whatever years remain to me in earning it. I shall live wherever you choose to put me. I shall stand whenever you choose to enter. I shall not approach the boy without your hand upon my arm. I ask for the use of my name, which is your name, and for the slow gift of your forgiveness, in your own time, in your own measure, upon your own terms. There is nothing in the gift of this dukedom that is not already, by right and by church and by law, yours. I lay it at your feet because it has always been there. I only failed, until this afternoon, to look down. Wilmot looked at him a long moment. Then she leaned, very slightly, and laid her gloved hand against the white cicatrice at the corner of his jaw, in the gesture she had not been permitted to make for 3 years and 4 months. The room saw it. The room did not this time make a sound. Rise, Godfrey, she said, in front of the right people. He rose. She kept her hand within his. The Duchess of Devonshire, with the perfect timing of a hostess who had given 300 balls and seen every variety of disaster turn to triumph at her own parquet, lifted one finger to the orchestra. The first bar of a waltz dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The Duke of Markby led the Duchess of Markby into the center of the floor. The 700 drew back to make a ring about them. He set his bare right hand at her emerald-clad waist. She set her white-gloved hand upon his black shoulder. They turned, once, twice, 3 times, in the slow Viennese measure that had been new to London 10 years before, and had been waiting, perhaps, for precisely this evening. Above, in the gallery, Lady Jersey leaned to Lady Sefton and murmured something brief. Lady Sefton smiled. Other couples, at the proper moment, joined. In a small bedchamber 3 streets away, a child of 3 years and 4 months, who had been put to sleep beneath a wool shawl beside an old woman's tortoiseshell lorgnon, turned in his sleep without waking. The covina showed, soft, in his right cheek. The carnerino de pano lay tucked beneath his arm where the nursery maid had placed it. In Markby House in Grosvenor Square, where the chandeliers had been lit at 6 and the linen turned down in the great chamber and a small bed prepared in the dressing-room next door, Mr. Ambrose Fenwick sat alone in the library with a glass of port he had not yet touched, looking at the coffer in the corner, where for 3 years and 4 months he had kept a folded paper unsigned upon his side, and he permitted himself, for the second time in 11 years, a single deliberate breath. In Devonshire House, the waltz turned to its second measure. The Duke of Markby looked down at his wife, Wilmot. Godfrey, I do not know yet how to do this. Neither do I. We have the rest of our lives to learn. Lead the next turn properly, Your Grace. The patronesses are watching. He almost smiled. The cicatrice moved at the corner of his jaw. He led the next turn properly. And so the Duchess of Markby, who had been, in the space of a single afternoon, a seamstress mending a bonnet for 3 pences, a woman struck in a garden, a name restored before the Lord Chancellor, a tiara set upon a head not crowned in 3 years and 4 months, and the silent partner of a waltz in the largest ballroom in London, came back at last into the life that had been hers all along, not by the grace of the man who had repudiated her, but by the steady, unbroken truth of the woman she had remained, while he learned, slowly, and at last in public, to see her. She had worn grey wool for 3 years and 4 months because the world had refused to see her. She wore emerald silk now because she had, in the end, refused to be unseen. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever, like Wilmot, carried a sealed truth in your pocket while the world insisted you no longer existed? Is there a child in your life whose dimple, whose eyes, deserve a name spoken out loud in the right room? And when the chance finally came to walk into the ballroom in emerald instead of gray, would you have asked for an afternoon, or demanded the public word? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity restored in silence, justice that arrives at the appointed hour, and love that recognizes its own child across a London street, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.